Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Stratosphere Lounge. I'm your host, Bill Whittle, and this is episode number 58. Episode 58 of that Undying program, and good to see everybody. Good to be here. Interesting week. They're always interesting weeks, generally speaking, I would say. So a lot of fun stuff to talk about, and tonight, as you may know, is we were going to do movie night, but I'll tell you why we couldn't do that in a minute. But as it turns out, tonight we're going to finally get to the dreaded one-word question answers. We were doing 5-word questions, 4-word questions, 3, 2, and got down to 2, and then we been putting off the 1. So we thought we'd do the 1 tonight. That way I can talk about the movie a little bit more, all the movies in a little more detail next time. But hi everybody, it's good to see you, and certainly good to be back after missing last week. So. We got a bunch of one-word questions, a bunch of things to talk about, so I'll get to all of that. I see from the comment stream just a second ago, there's some. I was just this instant check drudge, but did Leonard Nimoy die? I hope that's not true, but I wouldn't be surprised if it was. Who'd have thought, that if that's true, and I guess somebody's going to let me know in the comment section any second here now. Who'd have thought that Bill Shatner would outlive, so many of these people? Honestly, he seems to be going just strong. Yeah, I think this came in just minutes. Oh, sorry, he's not dead. Apparently he's confined to his chair. Anyway, Leonard, I sure hope you get better. I always thought that Leonard Nimoy was a tremendously class act of an individual and an actor. So. Hopefully, it's still way too early to be talking about his obituary. But it's a funny thing, actually, and we'll do another sci-fi show. We're overdue for one of those, I think. But I think one of the most interesting things that happened to me in the course of my life was the switch from being a Spock fan to a Kirk fan. That's funny, when I was a kid, I was always a Spock guy, and now I'm a Kirk guy. I just kind of identify with him a lot better than I guess I did, or than I do with Mr. Spock. And I don't want to get that. See if I can get permission from PJ TV to put that Star Trek Afterburner up there. That's certainly not the best work I've ever done, but it's my favorite work. Where I was on the bridge of the Enterprise, I love that so much. So anyway, hopefully, as I say, it looks like he's quite ill, but hopefully he'll be recovering, or if not, I hope he's comfortable. Anyway, he's a good man, and I always liked him. I always thought he was a good person, a good individual. Okay, so before we get to the questions, as some of you may know from our Facebook page update yesterday, we had the Los Angeles premiere of The Arroyo, Jeremy Boring's movie. And it was, it was remarkable. I mean, the movie was made for so little money, but it's an actual, honest-to-God movie with real people up there and real stories, special effects. And it's just amazing. I mean, I handed that movie off. I edited the film. That's really all I had to do with it. I didn't write it or wasn't there for the shooting or anything. But I did edit it. And I think when I handed it off, it was almost 1.5 years, 2 years ago. That's how long it takes sometimes to finish post on something, especially when you're kind of scripting along with a budget. But I hadn't seen it color corrected. I hadn't seen the audio mix, and I hadn't seen the movie with the musical score in. And man, oh man, those are some big differences. Big differences. It really looked just remarkably professional and good, and it's great. And Jeremy, of course, is as some of you may know, has been the face of Friends of Abe. For a while after the story broke on the news, the New York Times. I can neither confirm nor deny the existence of that organization. But he did a great job with what he had, and he really made a cool little movie. And I think those of you who are members of Declaration Entertainment would love it. It's going to get sent out to you. I don't know exactly when. The DVDs are certainly not finished yet. I don't know if they've gone out. The show was just mastered, and as Jeremy and I said when we made the transition from Declaration Entertainment, which really it's been his company really virtually from the beginning, that when we decided to close that down and launch BillWhittle.com, we decided that if you had ever been a member of Declaration Entertainment, even if it was just for 1 month, we were going to get you a copy of the DVD. For many of you were members for 3 years, and certainly earned that. And very, very grateful for the opportunity. Maybe the single greatest thing that that the Arroyo will have achieved is it looks when he said at the preview yesterday at the premiere, he said that they had a deal with iTunes. And frankly, if you can get a movie on iTunes and Amazon, there is a budget range where you can almost not fail to make that money back. It's a small budget, but the technology is making things much, much cheaper. Cameras that used to cost, hundreds of thousands of dollars now are $2,000 for a Blackmagic 2K camera, and closer to $8,000, I guess, for 4K for what they shoot, actual feature films with. We have a Red camera that we got for the virtual presidency that shoots, it's The Hobbit, and everything's shot on the Red. So the ability to make films is getting a lot cheaper. We edit them on our home computer. Jeremy's associate producer, Jonathan Hay, did the special effects on the movie, and he did them in the back room on After Effects. He was just starting After Effects, but he just went in there and did it. And when we got the source footage, Jeremy would say, okay, and then he comes around the corner, and you see a guy with a rifle going click, click, click. He says, yeah, so we'll have the muzzle flashes in there, and then he's going to shoot the window out of that pickup truck. And I said, sure he is. But he did. Jonathan put bullet holes in cars, and there's a scene where you've got two actors in this truck, and all of a sudden, you're looking at the raw footage, and it was speed and action, and they're sitting there looking at each other, and then somebody off camera yells, bang, and they flinch. You think, okay. But I'll tell you what, when they get a sound mixer in there and puts that really percussive gunshot bang, and the glass shatters, and the glass from the glass from the window comes across the shot, just shattering glass comes across the shot, and there's blood splatter on the inside of the window, and the bullet goes into the other side upholstery and pops upholstery out into the air, and puts a bullet hole in the other side of the interior. And none of that stuff actually happens. It's absolutely bloody amazing. And just fun to watch. So there's a lot of great action beats in the story, and it's a really great little story. So I don't know when they'll be issuing the DVD. It's kind of in Jeremy's hands, but needless to say, you fine people will be the first to know. So I'm going to talk about actually all three movies tonight, I think, a little bit based on the questions. Got lucky with some connections. So so that's it for the Arroyo. Good news, and it's up and open. By the way, they had the actual premiere was in Lubbock about a month ago, 3 weeks ago. And they rented a theater in Lubbock, and it was shot in Lubbock, and Jeremy's from Lubbock, Texas. And so everybody came out, and it was a great night and all that other stuff, and big premiere, and everybody was happy. But they had the theater for a week. They had a screen for a week in Lubbock, and it was the second most popular movie in that Metroplex. It was a big one, too, and this is up against Lone Survivor and stuff. Held it over for 2 weeks. They had that movie was ran for 3 weeks there based on demand. So that's a good sign. And it was fun to go last night to the ArcLight Theater here in Sherman Oaks, because that's where I see all of the big movies. I just walk across the street to the ArcLight, and seeing it on the screen in there was really great. That was really fun, and it was fun to edit a feature. I'd never done that before, but that's a damn well edited movie, actually. Especially the action sequences; those are really challenging. You get all these things that are in motion, and trying to make them cut, and you're trying to make the action continuous, and it's challenging. It was really fun. Anyway, so that's good news. So we're going to talk a little bit about the other movies tonight, and let me just tell you why we postponed movie night tonight. I still have to get drafts of some of these things together before I really can talk too much about them. I'd really just like to have one more draft in there covered with copyright before I go really talking about the details of the story, but I can talk about it a little bit on all of them. So I have the top-rated questions, but I only did the 6 or 7 top-rated questions. Then I went through and did dealer's choice, and maybe that's how we'll do it in the future. I know a lot of people are bothered by, the certain rankings and so on and so forth, and that'd probably be the end of the Tiemann's embargo. We have so much fun here. Okay, so let's get going. Let's do some questions here. And in no particular order, T.M. Smith starts his one-word question with C.S.R. Yes, I'll take that. I'll take C.S.R. as a word. CSR is. Let me tell you what I can tell you about CSR. I won't make the full announcement until we get there, but it looks very good that we will be able to get enough money to basically shoot the Common Sense Resistance as a low-budget feature film, which we would then release in 6 or 7 minute or 5 minute or 3 minute webisodes. So basically what we would do is we would go out and shoot a movie. And then when we shoot the movie, we'd release it in, weekly or, daily or twice a week, whatever, bits, so that you would really generate, kind of the web presence, because the Common Sense Resistance is designed for young people. That's who it's for. It's designed to make these concepts and these ideas, these conservative ideas, the renegades and the underdogs and the rebels. That's the whole purpose of it. So it looks like we're going to be able to get the money to do that, which means we'll probably shoot it in late spring, somewhere hopefully in April. That'll give me a chance to get behind the camera, which I haven't done for a long time. So that'll be fun. And then what the good news about that is this story will have an arc to it. And if it comes out as a weekly webisode where you're actually seeing the world and living in the world, I'm hoping that will serve as kind of the picture frame so that people can then do their kind of underground political commentary, and I can do some too, or other people can do some, and the movement can really spread. And then, we can do all the real-world common sense resistance stuff, all the real-world wrenches, and we'll get to those in a minute, and all that stuff. Just make it really happen, and the T-shirts and all that jazz. I've trademarked the Common Sense Resistance. You guys will get a kick out of this. Trademarked the Common Sense Resistance wrench and fist logo, and I've trademarked the name. And the reason I've trademarked the name is not so that I can defend it against you guys. I trademarked the name so that I could defend it against the left, basically trademarking my own idea. I'm putting a foot where the trademark should be specifically so that we don't enforce it against our team, which means that we will just basically give out the template for all the graphics and all the logos and all that other stuff. And if you want to make T-shirts or bumper stickers or whatever, if you want to make T-shirts and use the logo for your own webpage, for your own wrench, for your own node, I think that's the smart play on my part and the way to go. Last thing I want to do is set up. The whole point of this network is that it is non-hierarchical, uncommanded, unstructured. It is self-assembling network of individual intelligent nodes that find each other on an as-needed basis. And so the last thing I want to do is worry about things like enforcing copyrights on logos. But since there is such a dramatic logo, I don't want somebody else to get the logo either. So that's been trademarked, so that's great. And who knows what can come out of it, all kinds of cool things. But I actually have a story that I think is really much better. Those of you who read Under the City, there was kind of a first pass on just a little scene from the movie, the opening scene from the movie. But I really didn't like the ending of that after I reread Under the City. It was way, way too explanatory and too, it just revealed everything. So basically what's going to happen is the general arc of the Common Sense Resistance is going to be about a guy who's probably in his mid to early 30s who's having a Super Bowl party. This is set 30 years in the future in his shabby little government apartment. And he's having a Super Bowl party because he's made a commercial. He works for the Office of Communications for Omni, which is the American political party after the economic collapse caused by too much debt. So he's basically just a kid who's, a young guy who's good with messaging, and he makes a commercial in favor of Omnicare and the amazing Omni chip that's been implanted in everybody's arms for the last 25 years, and upgrades to the chip, and how now, if you don't have to worry about carrying cash, and your equalization is taken care of automatically, your pay is transferred electronically to this little tiny rice-sized chip in your arm. You don't have to swipe it. It just senses you when you go out a checkout line, rings it up, and debits you. And if it turns out you're having hardship, it can, put a little extra in there, and it takes care of all of your housing needs. And we know where you are, so if you get sick, or if you're hit by a bus, we can get medical attention right to you right away. And if you're having a heart attack, it's just like a medical alert. So it's basically talking about how awesome this tracking chip is, and how good it is. And he's very proud of the commercial. And intercut with this, in the opening scene, you see the three guys going down through the L.A. River and then into the culvert, and they launch this pirate radio signal, but it's not a big old long didactic speech like the one I had in Under the City. It's much, 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 much more of a tease because we got a feature film length to play with here. So they maybe just put the C.S.R. logo up there, and basically one thing I was thinking about doing is do like a very, very stylized animation of an eagle screeching and flying through the air and dipping down into the stream and picking up salmon. I mean like black on white, like almost like ink drops kind of thing. Really, really, really like, paper mache cutouts, cameo cutouts, black on white paper kind of thing. And then feeding its young and stuff, and then it looks down and it flies down, and there's this giant cage, and the eagle walks into the cage and pushes this lever, and a little food pellet comes out, and the eagle eats it, and then it pushes another food pellet, and the eagle eats that, and then the baby eaglets all start eating food pellets, and they're in a cage, but the door's open, and that's the idea of a bald eagle in a cage where the door is open is in fact what the common sense resistance is trying to say. And it's a much better way of saying it. It's a much more dramatic way of saying it. So when this pirate message appears on everybody's screens during the Super Bowl, this kid is enough of a messaging guru to see that that this is a really brilliant idea. And because he reacts so positively to it, he gets called into the director of communications office, and who's really the minister of propaganda. And he's asked to infiltrate the common sense resistance. And he says, I'm not a spy. You need an agent for that. He said, no, we want you to do it. And the reason we want you to do it was because when the commercial came on, your heart rate went straight through the ceiling. Your adrenaline was pumping. Your eyes dilated. You really resonated with the message. That puts him on the defensive. He feels like he's a traitor now. The common sense resistance is a terrorist group descended from those Tea Party terrorists of 2 generations before. But he's asked to try and infiltrate and join. And so basically that's all I'm going to give you right now. But the story arc is, you've got this guy who's sort of a junior party up-and-comer who they're keeping an eye on. They ask him to infiltrate the common sense resistance. He's taken that night, he goes to a party in the Hollywood Hills and sees things that he's never seen as a guy who's lived on the government dole like everybody else in the world. Everybody in the world is on the government dole, except for the people who are in the government. They live fabulous lives. So he gets taken up to the Hollywood Hills and he gets to this party, and all of a sudden there's this beautiful blonde girl who's really interested in talking to him, and it's made pretty clear to him that if he goes along and does this, there's going to be all kinds of rewards for him. He's going to move up in the fast track. He's going to be able to have a nice house too, because he'll be part of the inner party, right? Inner circle. That's how it works in socialist countries. You get your own dacha if you're part of the inner central committee. So basically the whole story is him trying to infiltrate the common sense resistance. And there's a big tough gatekeeper guy who's kind of head of security for the common sense resistance, and he doesn't trust him, but he's got to work with him. They want to know what they can find out about the guy. And basically the whole movie becomes, as he discovers more and more and more about the common sense resistance, and as they let him in deeper and deeper and deeper based on him passing certain tests, he learns more and more of the philosophy. The more philosophy he learns, the more he likes it. And so we never know whether or not he's a traitor or a spy or a convert or what. And I've got a really good ending on this thing I like very much. And that's all I can say about it right now. But I won't know for sure until another couple weeks, but I think we'll be able to do this, get the money to do this. And we'll make a real announcement when that happens, and we'll blow out all the new T-shirts and all kinds of cool things. So that's where C.S.R. is right now. And to give it a real feature film gloss, and when I say gloss, I guess I'm really saying grit, it's got to look really, really good, and it will look good. It's going to look really rugged and dirty and greasy and grimy and all of the stuff underground. My vision as a director is that all the stuff underground will be handheld footage and crowded and small and jumping and moving around, and the stuff in the government world, especially in the higher levels of the skyscrapers and at the cocktail party, everything's going to be on a dolly. It's just going to glide and smooth and clean and so on. So as I've said before about the common sense resistance, you don't have to have a line of dialogue. If you've got a guy who is given free housing, free food, free health care, and uses public transportation, and then he's given a hot girlfriend on top of it, and he decides to abandon all of these things and rip this chip out of his arm without anesthesia, Somebody in the comment section just picked my choice for the security agent, but I can't repeat it because I haven't talked to him yet, although he's a friend of mine. Take that. The fact that he's willing to do that and go live down with these people and scurry and be hunted and be, tracked. And there's shootouts. I mean, there's big shootouts. I've got some good compositing guys. I'm going to try and have, I think I got a good chance to do a quadrotor. These quadrotors that they have the drones for, and the tilt rotors that they used in Avatar. These kind of cool-looking sort of helicopters with twin ducted rotors on the side. I think I can have a quadrotor chase scene through L.A., and that would be kind of cool. So entire parts of L.A. will be just blacked out. I mean, you'll look at the city from above, and it'll be L.A., but there'll be giant areas of miles and miles square where the lights just are out, and they've been out for a long time. And you see little campfires burning down there. And you'll, through the miracle of compositing, you'll get a look at downtown Los Angeles, which will look exactly as it does today, except that there will be one brand new building which will be lit up, and that's going to be gorgeous, and that'll be where the government is. And the rest of the buildings will be partially lit, and some of them will be completely blacked out and dark, and you'll see little cook fires and camping fires out there in the smashed windows. So it's a world after the economic collapse, and the GDP is a hundredth of what it was before the collapse, and the government's taken over everything, and there you go. So somebody in the comment section, Darren, said, how can there be shootouts with the government when the government's trying to take all the guns from us? The government did take all the guns from the people up top, but they didn't take all the guns from the people who didn't give up their guns, and that's who the common sense resistance is. They didn't give up their guns, and they didn't give up their ingenuity, they didn't give up their freedom. And one of the small little beats in the common sense resistance, as I see it, is the idea that that this freedom thing has to be enjoyed, has to be fun, and it has to be exhilarating for a guy who's been raised virtually his entire life in the the loving arms of the nanny state to go out and they're going to take a little trip out to the country, and they've saved some guns, but they also saved a Stingray convertible, and this guy's going to be driving down an open highway way outside of the city in a Corvette Stingray with the top down, and playing the Beach Boys, fun, and you look on that guy's face, you see, the look on his face should be able to do what 50,000 afterburners and firewalls could never do. And you're not bludgeoning people with anything, you're not bludgeoning them. You're just say this is what freedom is, and he'd never experienced before. It'll be like watching you ever see these videos where people, deaf people hear for the first time or something like that. It should look like that, and so that's really what it comes down to. These people are going to be the underdogs, and there's some very cool, very, very cool little pieces of chrome, little neat little things that are like, oh, that's kind of cool. That's well thought. That's what I'd like it to be. I'd like it to be well thought out. It's not like they're just hiding. They have to not only hide, they have to hide from somebody with the NSA's resources, right? And that's not easy. And in order to hide from the NSA, you got to have guys who used to work in the NSA. Anyway, that's it. And I think we're going to see I hope to see a number of conservative actors in this thing. And I won't give any more away. I just feel very good about them getting the money and quickly. So that's great. And if you want to help out, you can certainly become a member at BillWhittle.com. That always helps us with just about everything, but I understand times are tough too. So that's Common Sense Resistance, C.S.R. That was the first question. So moving on to number 2, Joshua Arguen says, nanotechnology? Nanotechnology. Yeah. I'll tell you why I'm... well, first of all, I was going to deal with this since it was the top-rated question, I think. But let me just put another literally put a little bug in your ear here. One of the fun things about nanotechnology is big bat problems, which is the giant, unsung, nobody knows anything about project. I need to get that... script updated and copyrighted before I can go into too many details about that too. I love that movie. That's going to be so much fun. That movie... Big Bat Problems is actually an extremely interesting and fun movie. It's got a lot of great points to make. The point in Big Bat Problems is mostly you've got a series of individual Americans who have encountered these creatures over the course of many, many years, and they kind of find each other. And each one of them, since it's it's a bit like it's a lot like Buckaroo Banzai in a way. So every one of them is barking mad, except for the two protagonists, the two brothers. They're barking mad. But they're such individualists. There's a mariachi band, and there's a guy who thinks he's a preacher from the Old West, and there's a guy who dresses up in Napoleonic, hussars as a cavalry officer, brings his own horses behind him. It's just a collection of these weird, unusual individuals who are trying to hunt down and kill these giant bat creatures, and the government is trying to stop them because the government wants a large number of terrifying bat creatures, because once they get enough of them, the people will say, somebody help us please, government, and that'll be the power that they need. So there's a lot of stuff under the radar there with Big Bad Problems that really is not obvious because it just looks like a fun action-adventure horror comedy. And the first act is horrible. It's just horrible. The guy is transformed into a bat. So that's why I wanted to talk about nanotechnology, because the original idea behind Big Bad Problems, long before I got into the political arena, I think I first had the basic idea for this right around 1999. And I thought it would be cool if the alien invasion of planet Earth was done through nanotechnology, where instead of sending a giant spaceship and all of the mass that entails and all of the mass of the living creatures on board it, slower than light, you got to carry all of that mass. You got to have fuel to push that mass. You have to fuel to slow the mass down. And every time you add a pound, you have to add 4 pounds or 12 pounds or 8 pounds or 50 pounds of fuel. So I thought the way to do colonization from another species would be to send a mothership about the size of a softball, maybe a basketball, top end. And in Big Bad Problems, what happens? The very first scene of the movie is you see the second scene in the movie. The first scene of the movie is the tease that shows you how the monster works. But the first scene in the actual story, the present day story, first scene's a flashback, is just this dad walking down the street, and he's going into his office, has a conversation with a neighbor, and something bites him on the neck. A mosquito, just swats it, doesn't think twice about it, goes inside, and then you get down right on the cement, a macro shot where you can see each individual pebble, each individual pebble, and you're right on the cement, and the concrete blocks are huge, and the gaps between the concrete blocks are like chasms, and you're just dollying along this cement sidewalk, and then you see up ahead this bug, looks like a little mosquito, but sparks are coming off of it, and you get close enough to it, and you're looking down at it, and it looks like a metallic mosquito, and that's exactly what it is. It's a little flying robot mosquito, and it just bit Dad, and now bad things start happening to Dad. And what happened to Dad was they put nanobots into his blood through the mosquito. The mosquito's not the nanotechnology. The mosquito is the delivery system. So Dad wakes up the next day and his tongue is really coated and he's got kind of weird sores over his chest. And over the course of the first act, in the tradition of The Fly, which was the Cronenberg movie with Jeff Goldblum, was just simply the most horrible horror movie I've ever seen. It really creeped me out. It was fantastic. So much like the Fly, the first act of Big Bad Problems is the story of these two boys, these two sons, watching their dad turn into one of these things. And they can't go to the hospital because Dad's a epidemiologist, and he knows that if he goes to the hospital, they're just going to put him in isolation, and he won't be able to help anything, and he won't be able to look into anything, and he doesn't want to do that. He wants to know what's going on. The kids are both smart kids. One's a molecular biologist, and the other one, the 16-year-old, wants to be a SEAL. 15-year-old wants to be a SEAL. These kids have to watch their dad slowly turning into one of these things, and that's basically what's happening. These aliens have sent any number of these spheres to Earth filled with these mechanical mosquitoes, and these mechanical mosquitoes fly out and bite. They're not biting people. They're not looking for people because they don't know what's here. They're designed to look for a biomass that's of approximately the same size as the aliens. And so rather than sending aliens here to colonize this planet, the way they colonize the planet is they turn us into them. And you could say, well, that doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense to your psychology, but it makes sense to theirs. They are going to have, they're going to just basically send these spheres filled with miniature mechanical mosquitoes that bite animals that are the right size. Turns out that we're the right size, and turn us into them by literally splicing the DNA, literally unzipping it, and then rearranging the base pairs. And so Dad is just slowly turned into one of these creatures from the inside out as his genetic structure changes. And it's kind of cool. I've never heard of anything like that quite before. And the creatures that come are creatures that are winged creatures and have talons, and they look like gigantic bats, but they're not. They're not bats at all. And they're not vampires. But they are liquivores, and they are echolocators. So, interesting. One of the things I really put a lot of thought into is the entire, when you deal with echolocators like a bat or a dolphin, but let's just say a bat or something with very poor eyesight or no eyesight, because this guy's eyes fall out. That's one of the things that happen to him as he starts changing. When he starts to change into an echolocator, and you actually have a race of echolocators, it's one thing to say, hey, they're echolocators, and it's another thing completely to understand what that means, to really think about it, to think about what their sensory package does for them, what advantages it confers, and what disadvantages it confers. And actually, in my opinion, it's way disadvantageous compared to sighted creatures. But it has its own strengths, can see in the dark, so to speak, and it's just going to be fun. It's really going to be cool and fun. By the way, I was really disappointed because I hoped to open the show with the theme from Buckaroo Banzai, but I didn't do the conversion correctly because I do everything at 5:45. But I'll have it next week. So it'll have that Buckaroo Banzai feel. It'll have that kind of just a little bit tongue-in-cheek kind of thing. And Viper Check, our F-16 friend in the comment section, just said, so the dad is going to be Batman, huh? And so I never thought about that before. That's exactly right. Never actually did the Batman conversion, so yeah. Anyway, so these people who've all encountered these things and suffered some kind of loss basically form a convoy and use all this homegrown tech, the Brookstone remote rovers, and they've got iPads, and they've got the they're flying their quadrotors with iPads, and they're just going out to kill these things. They got their own weapons, and the government is trying to stop them. Originally was just going to have it just be them going to kill the bats, but you need a push. You can't just have a pull. You have to have a push. So that's the fun part of nanotechnology, Joshua. As far as the serious question behind nanotechnology, this is one of those things that we just can't predict in the way that we couldn't predict the internet. Nobody who first put, I guess it was at DARPANet, when they first put two wires between computers and sent, what was it, a 5-letter message, nobody imagined that we'd be talking to each other, or at least, yeah, we're talking to each other, and people talking to me in the comments stream. No one imagined that this would ever be happening. It's just utterly impossible to imagine. So when you talk about nanotechnology, you really have a sketch of what might be possible, but the one thing you can count on is you have no idea what's actually going to come out of it. And I suppose it's a cliche to say that one thing that most people worry about is if these things get out of control. The reason it works, the reason you can pack enough of these nanobots into a little tiny mosquito and have it change a man is because one of the first things they do is that they just reproduce. They just make more and more and more factories, and then the factories start spitting out the little DNA changers. It's literally the definition of a viral kind of a growth, and of course the great old saw about the dangers of nanotechnology are the gray goo, right? It's where these things are able to break down matter on a molecular basis, and as they do so, they continue to multiply, and they exponentially multiply, and pretty soon the world just is reduced to gray goo. Everything's just been broken down by these out of control creatures. But when you get all that said, the ability to work on such small scales means so much in terms of medicine. I recently saw, I'm sure you saw it, Josh, if you asked the question, they made a movie, IBM made a movie using atoms. They made a little stick figure. It looks exactly like a 1-pixel kind of a stick figure from the very first days of computing. They made a little stick figure. I think he's like dropping a ball or is hitting a ball or something, and it's individual atoms. So that's pretty cool. I think obviously the greatest potential, at least in terms of the foreseeable future, we won't know what these technologies will be able to do for us until we employ them. But obviously, this is in the field of medicine, right? When you have a little machine that can either go in there and attach a certain kind of a medicine or radioactive particle to a specific cancer cell or something, you don't have to irradiate the whole body. And you literally just put such a minute amount of radiation right on the cell. You find something, you cut the cells up. I mean, nanotechnology means the end of cancer, probably means the end of many of these kind of biological haywire kind of diseases. And I just don't know where it's going to go. And that's what I like most about it is I think I don't think you know where it's going to go, and I'm a little worried about this one. But, I'll tell you something else. It does seem that the worry of the worst-case scenario never really comes to pass. If you don't believe me, just think of Y2K. Remember that, when all the airplanes were going to come falling out of the sky? So, hard to say. But good question. Thank you. And Josh writes right below that, he says wrenches. And I just wanted to pick that up real quick because the fun thing about just go back to it. The fun thing about the Common Sense Resistance is it's not just a movie idea, and it's not just a picture frame for political commentary, which I think it is, rather than me standing in front of a white screen talking about, the Laffer curve. I think it's a lot more interesting if it's a 17-year-old kid lying in concrete rubble with a 45 at his side, and he's got a little tiny lantern, and he's drawing the Laffer curve in chalk against a concrete wall. I think that's much more interesting than that. So, hey, I just got a bandwidth warning, which I haven't had in years. I wonder if anybody in the office is using the internet. That never makes me happy. I do not like seeing that at all. Let me just check. There's some people in the office that normally are not here. Excuse my delay. Let me just see if anybody's using the internet, because I haven't had that in a long time. Is anybody downloading anything? Hello? Well, there's nobody here, and we got green bars, so much for that. Anyway, sorry about the delay. Hope anybody didn't lose it. It doesn't look like we lost this stream, and haven't seen that in weeks and years, almost months and months. So that's basically it. And I think it's going to be a really fun movie. And again, the whole point of this is that this is a date movie. It's a fun date movie. It's a popcorn movie with lots of action and lots of gunfire and monsters and horror and bizarre, fun kind of tongue-in-cheek sort of things. But it's got a real message in there, and the fun part of it is nobody knows they're getting a message. So that's that. So, sorry, that was a big bad thing. It's going to talk about the wrenches. Sorry, I lost my place. The wrenches are interesting because back to Common Sense Resistance, this is something that is going to exist in the real world. And in the worst case scenario, it's just going to be a role-playing game. But I think it's going to be bigger than that. I really actually think this network could be something. I think the whole idea of a series of nodes, that's what the wrenches are, series of nodes of people who just know how to do things. That's all the Common Sense Resistance Network is, period. It's just people who have opted in who know how to do something. And so each one of those nodes is a certain kind of node. And again, I could come up with categories of nodes, but the more I try to control it, the more limited it gets. I'm going to let you guys decide what kind of a wrench it is. But if it's a construction wrench, and somebody else is a aviation wrench, and I've used this example before, but if there's flooding in, southwestern Missouri or something, and there's nobody commanding the network, nobody's saying flooding in southwestern Missouri, but if a guy or a wrench, a network node in Missouri, says, hey, there's flooding, and sends a message out through this Common Sense Resistance Network, then a construction node can say, well, we're right next door, in the next state over, and then an aviation node can say, well, we got 2 Cessna 172s and 5 pilots. And they just working together without any centralized control, without it coming through me or anyone else, talk to each other and then go out and do some good. And that's basically how it works. So it'd be nice to have it in the real world, and And as I said, when we get to the point where we're ready to get this thing going, this will happen well before we shoot the film. Once we get the film money, I've been away from the table for a while. I've been working on a lot of fun things. But once we get to the point where we're ready to go, and we're in pre-production for the shoot, then we can start making the common sense resistance actually happen in the real world. We'll start sending out the wrench names, and we'll start giving out the code names and the mailing list. So everybody who's in the common sense resistance will have an updated copy of everyone else in the common sense resistance. Each one of the nodes, each wrench, consists of 5 people. One of those people will be the contact person. Can't have all 5 of them. It's just nuts. It's way too many emails and too many people. So the person who's the contact person will be C.S.R. Buick 6, and they'll get the node messages coming in. They can disregard virtually all of them, but if there's 1 or 2 that they like, they can be a part of that, send it back up, and off you go. So at the very least, it'll be fun and cool and kind of a hidden handshake kind of thing. And if it gets better, it could be an actual political movement. And if they keep spending all this money and all of this ruin, there may come a place where a network of decent, hardworking people with a skill set, kind-hearted, hardworking Americans with a skill set, may need to get in touch with other trusting, hardworking people with other skill sets, because we may find ourselves in the middle of a zombie apocalypse. I mean, if the debt system destroys the economy of the United States and the rest of the economy of the world goes, and there's no food and there's no money and there's no, any of that, then we're gonna be in trouble. And this is where you start getting into this whole idea of the remnant, right? And the idea that no matter how much destruction comes to Sodom and Gomorrah or any of these other places, there's it's a biblical term actually, that God always makes sure that a remnant survives. That this group of people who have this sense of carrying this fire inside them, this sense of being obligated to uphold and defend and carry civilization against all odds. Those people have to survive. Some of them do, and that everything that good that comes out of the wreckage is going to be based on them. A number of people in the comment section are saying their video's cutting out. I got good bandwidth back again. If you're not getting it, I'm awful sorry. And Ustream is tough, but most people watch us on YouTube, so sorry if you're having real-time streaming problems here. We haven't had that for a while. So anyway, that's it about the wrenches. So moving on out of these movie realms, I think we have one more coming up maybe, but moving on. Charles Strickland says, impeachment. I say no. I cannot imagine a world where that happens, Charles. I mean, it's just enough work just to get the press to admit he did something wrong. I just, given, this is a mixed answer. I just don't see, as a plain-spoken answer, you get that from me anyway. I'm not going to mince words with you here. I don't see any world where a black president is impeached. I just don't see any world where the press would do it. I don't think there's any world where congressional Republicans would do it. And they wouldn't do it because they're afraid of the charges of racism, and that's what allowed this scoundrel to get away with everything that he's gotten away with. I'm not afraid of that charge. It doesn't bother me, and the reason I'm not afraid of it is because when we were in debate and we were trying to do flow the arguments and stuff, and somebody would criticize something with your plan, let's say, or with something, and you would say that is not a unique disadvantage. In other words, it's not a unique disadvantage means that both sides of the argument suffer from the same flaw, so it's a wash. And my attitude towards being called a racist is it's not a unique disadvantage, because they're going to call me a racist whether I criticize him on the basis of his spending, or if I criticize him on the basis of his race, they're going to call me a racist anyway. I've watched it happen over all the years. I've heard the Tea Party and conservatives slandered as, oh, you hate him because he's black. It's like, no, it's the only thing I like about the guy, actually. I hate him because he's red. Anyway, that's your answer, Charles. There's no way in the world that's going to happen. They're just not going to do it. Part of that is because, as I say, they're just not going to impeach a black president under any circumstances. I cannot imagine it happening. On a different level, the press is not going to. There's not going to be impeachment proceedings because the press will provide him with the shield because they ideologically agree with him. They understand what he's doing. They agree with it, and What else do you have to say? When the President of the United States stands in front of the United States Congress and says to the Congress, in the floor of the House of Representatives, I am going to bypass all of you elected representatives. We're tired of waiting. We're tired of congressional inaction. I'm going to use executive orders, and I'm going to use the pen to make all of you people obsolete. And half of the room bursts into applause. What do you say to that when the Democrats are applauding the tyrant announcing that I'm going to simply circumvent the will of the people through you, the representatives? When Democratic congressmen applaud, you're in the loony bin there, and there's no press criticism that's going to get through. The only thing that's going to damage this guy is the real world consequences of his actions. So he will continue to take damage through Obamacare. If he gets Common Core, he'll take damage through Common Core. And I suspect he's probably going to leave office with, approval ratings in the high 20s. Small consolation. The bigger consolation will be, will the American people go opt up for a third one? I don't think there's a chance. And people talking about Hillary being inevitable, I think it's inevitable she's going to lose. I don't even think she's going to run, frankly. I don't know. Hillary's not just old, she's old news. I mean, if you can't defeat Hillary Clinton, Ted Cruz would destroy her. Ted Cruz would destroy her. And I really like Ted Cruz an awful lot. So anyway, sorry, Charles. I literally cannot imagine it. Listen, Charles, you saw it and I saw it, right, buddy? I saw the President of the United States of America sit on a couch, lean over to the ambassador of one of the countries that have been our arch enemies for 100 years, and certainly one of the most violent and anti-American power players in the world today, and lean over to the Russian ambassador and say, if you lay low and don't give me any trouble until after I'm elected, in other words, if you give me personal political gain, I will hand you the defense of Eastern Europe through the anti-missile shield. What did Benedict Arnold do that got him the title of the worst traitor in American history? He handed out the keys to a defense in exchange for personal political gain. It's treason. It's on camera. It's on camera. Didn't happen. The first firewall I'm going to do is going to be called gaslighting, and I'll talk about that. I was supposed to get him today. I did a speech in St. Louis a couple weeks ago and another one in Ramona a week before that. And they're both really pretty good speeches, I think. So I have some speaking engagement stuff up there. But I'll talk about this gaslighting effect. But I won't do it tonight because we've got a lot of stuff to do. But anyway, yeah. So sorry about that, Charles. Wish there was a happier answer. Jennifer Kearns-Lechner. Hi, Jennifer. Says Anglosphere. And I say, boy, I sure hope so. The Anglosphere is a term that's been coined for the political and cultural and military and economic alliance of the great English-speaking countries. That'd be Britain, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and the United States. And you could actually make a case. It's certainly not the Anglosphere, but you could make a case for India. But if you take Great Britain, Canada, the United States, Australia, New Zealand, you've got a globe-spanning set of Western liberal democracies, liberal in the true sense of the word, and they have an incredible amount of economic power and especially cultural power. Cultural penetration is unbelievable. And the idea of the Anglosphere is that we all share common values, and we do. The problem is that the home of the Anglosphere, the origin of the Anglosphere, Anglo land, is the first off the cliff. And that's probably not surprising, I guess. Great Britain, what's happening to Great Britain is horrifying and so sad. I'm half British. My mom's still a British subject to this day. And my mom. And, it's just a heartbreaking thing to watch. Not only the loss of this magnificent culture, and I know a lot of people say, well, they are very imperialistic. It's like, yeah, well, they were. And they were not ashamed of it. There's a map out there that I saw circulating a couple weeks ago, and it's the whole world painted pink, except for, I think, 3 exceptions. 3 countries that weren't painted pink. and the pink represented countries that had been invaded by the United Kingdom at some point or another in their history. And whew, it was everybody. They were busy out there, those Victorians. But with that said, the British system is the absolute, it's the wellspring of all of this wealth. We talk about wealth. I'm not talking about wealth like Bill Gates' wealth. I'm not talking about millionaire wealth. I'm talking about the ability to live in a house that doesn't have a dirt floor wealth. The aspects of the Anglosphere are really important, and it's not just these countries that I mentioned in terms of Britain and America and New Zealand, Australia, and Canada. The effect of the British Empire in terms of anglicizing huge portions of the world are really remarkable. That's why I said India. India is certainly not. India is not Canada, needless to say. But India has a great deal of the British Raj is in that culture. And you don't have to ask. I mean, these people, they were coming, Suti and the widows were being thrown onto bonfires, and the thuggies and the gangs that were riding around. And you want to talk about racism, you're going to have a hard time beating India for racism. I mean, these are people that had hundreds of different, castes and kingdoms and entire classes of hundreds of millions of people who you simply couldn't look at, let alone touch. So, it's all a very complicated thing, but if the Anglosphere were to stand together and just be proud of what they are and who they are, then they'd be an unimpeachable source of economic and military power. And the problem with us today in America is that we have disconnected our political strength and our economic strength and our military strength from our moral strength. What good does it do to have a military this powerful if we don't have the moral authority and willingness to use it in the defense of everything we believe? If we're not going to use the military to defend freedom here at home and protect it abroad, then it's the same as sinking the Navy, right? If you have a president who will not use the Navy, really under any circumstances, then might as well have sunk the Navy. And it's true for all of this. It's true for all of these great powers that we have. We seem to be so ashamed of them, and it's intentional. They've been working on making us ashamed of our own power for 50 years. And what the left has basically done is looked at the sword that the West holds and said, we cannot beat this sword. All we can do is wither the sword arm. We're just going to wither it arm. We're just going to make sure they never flex it and make sure that it hurts and painful and embarrassing. And so the sword is intact, but it never gets swung with any effort, with any effect, because of our lack of our moral core, our lack of our moral bearings. It's not the same as moral certainty, but I know which side I'm on in terms of Israel and Palestine. I know which side I'm on. It's not hard for me to figure out. One side is parliament, where Arabs can vote, and the other side blows up innocent people in a pizzeria, and when they're blown up in a pizzeria, they're taken to hospitals where they're worked on by their enemies, and they'll try to save their lives. Those are my values. I don't have any question about those values. I think those values are the values. I think they're human values. I think they're God values, and I think they deserve to be defended. And so let's defend them. Somebody just said, is Israel part of the Anglosphere? I would argue that it is. I think I don't know how I overlooked Israel. It's more certainly closer aligned to the Anglosphere than Ireland is. I'm sorry, than India is culturally, and Ireland as well. Ireland is has done an awful lot to deregulate stuff and anything back and forth. Everybody goes up and down. But for God's sakes, the horrible thing about Great Britain is the British people are watching their home just being taken away from them right before their eyes. They can't go to their own pubs anymore. They're not allowed to walk down certain streets in their own country anymore, because they're white, because they're white Brits. They'll be beaten up. And I'm sorry. That's intentional. That's what the left does. It's what the left intends to do. They want to do. They need power, you see. They want power over people. That's what the progressives are all about. They want a small ruling elite of the smart people to have power over the masses. And since they can't do that at the ballot box, because understandable reasons, people don't want to be ruled by other people and be made into slaves, the left understands that in order for them to have power, they have to import the muscle. And I don't necessarily mean the violence. I mean the political muscle. So if you can't win elections based on your ideas, why not offer citizenship to masses of people who will then vote for you, and then you do get elected? They game the system. It's like everything they do. They game the system. They have no loyalty to principles. And one of the things I'm going to be developing is this. Somebody sent me a book about RK selection, 2 different strategies for survival based on the relative abundance of food or resources in the environment. And the more I read about this, the more profoundly convinced I am that that's exactly what's happening, is that we have evolved primarily as a K-type species, which is competitive, puts a lot of effort into child rearing, is a competitive fighting species that needs to remain fit. And that as we produce so much prosperity and increase so much the abundance of resources, not just food, then all of a sudden this culture of ours starts turning into an R culture, which is more of a herd-like culture. So K-bred species would be lions and dolphins and wolves, and R-type species would be rabbits and gazelles and deer. And so when you've got lots and lots of food, you can be a rabbit and deer or a gazelle, but when you're competing for food, you got to be a dolphin or a wolf or a orca or a lion. And there are a lot. Was that you, Ohio Coastie? Thank you so much. Thank you very much for the book. I didn't get a name that I could connect to. I'm reading it now. It's very, very kind of you for sending it. It was written by an anonymous conservative, and I'd love to give him credit, but his name is Anonymous Conservative. I'm not nearly through it. I'm just getting started on it, but I think this is the key to everything. I'm going to combine this book with Evan Sayet's book on how liberals think, and really think this is the key to understanding not just liberals but conservatives. The difference between us, fundamental difference. They think like herd animals. They want predators to go away, and they don't want to fight. They don't have the means for it. They don't have the stomach for it. They don't have the ability for it. It makes them nervous and queasy seeing things fighting, and they think that the food supply will be there forever. And maybe they're right. But the food supply has been supplied by K-type species who have conquered the wilderness. And now that the Ks have produced so much abundance, we're starting to switch to an R kind of a mentality. And for people like me, who are about as K as they come, I guess, not through birth, I guess, yeah, through birth. I wanted to be a fighter pilot when I was 5 years old. I want to go shoot down bad guys. So, yeah, since birth. I want to pitch into 20 MiGs. I don't care about the odds. I just want to shoot them down. So watching the society turn into an R kind of a psychology is terrifying, because what you're basically doing is you're saying this weakness now that we're going to accept as the future, this lack of fitness, this lack of non-competitiveness, had better last forever, because if it doesn't, we're done. And I didn't see this in the book. It's an old expression from 25 years, 30 years old, or maybe even a little longer. But basically, it said, I think it was a general at the Pentagon who said, well, the day may come when the lion and the lamb lies down together, but if it does, we'd better damn sure be the lion. And man, I heard that 20 years ago, and I just thought, ooh, that's a profoundly perfectly stated thing. The lion and the lamb may lie down together in peace, but if that day ever comes, we better damn sure be the lion. And the reason that is so resonating with me is because you are then saying, I'm willing to accept peace, and I'm willing to accept swords into plowshares, so long as we still have the ability to fight. But the left just doesn't understand this. They think that they don't understand the difference between good predators and bad predators, between good wolves and bad wolves. They see everything that with teeth is bad. It's this whole sheepdog thing. I'm not going to get into that right now. But anyway, yeah, I don't know where you got that from Anglosphere, but anyway, it's interesting, and I'm looking forward to get a lot more out of that book, so that's cool. Moving on here, Andy Ebersbach says, hyperinflation. Andy, I don't know how you can avoid it. By the way, I'm sorry, I just caught something in the comment stream on the last one. And they were talking about the Morlocks and the Eloi here. Winston Smith, Room 101, greatest scream name of all time. I was talking about the Eloi and the Morlocks, which are from H.G. Wells' Time Machine, where in the future, that was my first thought too when I started reading this book, the future humanity splits into two different species. The Eloi are beautiful and lovely and haven't the slightest cares in the world. They live in little gardens and they're all gorgeous and they just sit there and have picnics and sex and breed more little Eloi, and they're happy as they can be. And then once every couple weeks, the sirens go off and they get herded into the Morlock temple, where they're taken downstairs and used for food. The Morlocks, on the other hand, are these horrible underground, gigantic, huge beasts, but they prey on the other species of humans, and that's the split. The R humans are up above, feeding on the endless food supply, and the Ks are down below, culling the herd. And you're the herd. So, yeah, it's a great example of those two things. So, anyway, hyperinflation, you know, I'm not an economist. I just have a little bit of common sense. And here's how it works. If I've saved $100 over the course of my lifetime by saving dollar bills, and the government prints thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of dollar bills, the dollar bills that I have saved are worth less. And pretty soon, they're worthless. And there's no way to avoid it. You cannot print wealth. The liberals think you can print wealth. You can't. You can print money, which is what we use to exchange for things of value, but you can't print wealth. And so, so the money becomes, the more money that's there, if the money source matches the creation of wealth, you need to pump enough money into an economy so that you have enough to buy increasing numbers of valuable things. That's appropriate. But when the money is becoming mass-produced relative to the wealth and growth, people understand that since there's so much of this money around now, I need more of it to buy something of similar value. So if there's $100 in the world, and there's $100 in the world, and you bought something for $1, you're a rich guy. You own 1% of the total wealth of the world. But if all of a sudden they print another $1,000 worth of money, that thing you bought for $1 is now worth a tenth of that. The thing didn't change. You just lost an order of magnitude of value for all the work you put in to buy that thing for $1 over the course of a lifetime. You slaved for a lifetime, saved $1, bought this pearl or whatever. And now you have 1% of the total wealth of the community because there's only $100 in the community. If suddenly the government of that community starts printing $1,000 or $10,000 or whatever, what's your dollar worth now? It's not worth 100th of the economy. It's worth a 10,000th of the economy, or whatever the case may be. So when you start cranking up money, people start charging more for things because they understand that the money is worth less. And when I go on speaking engagements, I've got in my pocket, I've done it once on the show, I'm not going to do it again, I've got a banknote, an actual banknote from the actual Bank of Zimbabwe. And I have a banknote on me, and it's in the amount of $5 trillion or 500 trillion? It's 5 trillion, I think. I forgot. So I'll do it real quick because it's a pretty quick little beat. Doesn't take a lot of time, but it's a powerful statement because it happens to be true, and it happens to be, unfortunately for us, irrefutable. So here's what I do when I go on the road. I say, okay, look, I've got two pieces of colored paper here, two little squares of colored paper, and they're absolutely identical in terms of what they are and how they're made. I've got, on the top, I've got a square of paper with a picture of a man on it, and it's printed in green and black ink, and it says $20. And below that, I have another square of paper that's printed in blue and purple ink, and it's got a pile of rocks on the front. This is $20 American money, and this is like this, drawn on the Federal Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe, and this bill is in the amount of, $100 trillion. So, as I say, I never leave the house unless I've got $100 trillion on me. If you get snowed in Denver, you may need to buy United Airlines. But I walk around every day with $100 trillion in my wallet. I sleep sound as a baby because it's worth about $4 or $5. as a novelty item, frankly. It wouldn't be worth that if it wasn't. So here's a story on hyperinflation. You want to know what hyperinflation is? True story. It comes from the Weimar Republic. In the days before the Nazis took over, the Weimar Republic was printing money to pay off this gigantic war debt that was imposed largely through the Treaty of Versailles. Not many people know this, but after the Treaty of Versailles, well after World War I think it was 1919, 1920, 21, somewhere in there, France invaded Germany. They just went in there and started taking the coal. They started taking German coal out of Germany with French soldiers because the Germans went on strike. And they let's do a little white balance here. They went on strike, and so the French soldiers came and started shipping back to Paris German coal, and the Germans were freezing. So they started printing money in order to pay off this debt, and everybody knew it, and so they started charging more and more and more. A loaf of bread went from 1 mark for a loaf of bread. A year later, it was 3 marks. A year after that, it was 2,000 marks. And a year after that, it was 50 billion marks or something similar to that kind of progression. But all you need to know about hyperinflation is this. A true story happened during the Weimar Republic. A woman went down to the bank because at the bank, they had stamps. And they were just rubber stamps. And the bank it had a little marker on it to make it a legitimate stamp. And what you would do is you would take your money down to the bank, and they would stamp 3 extra zeros on the back end of it. So if you had a 1,000-mark bill, you'd go to the bank, you'd present the 1,000-mark bill, and the bank would, in a very official way, put another 3 zeros on there. So now it was a 1,000-mark bill, now it's a 100,000-mark bill. Congratulations, knock yourself out. But a woman was going shopping for some bread or some cheese, eggs, something extremely simple, some giant, simple commodity like a loaf of bread. And the loaf of bread cost several million Reichmarks, or Deutschmarks, or whatever they were. So she had a giant basket, a big wicker basket, filled with money. And she and her child are going to the store with a gigantic basket full of money. And she put it down because the baby ran off and was going to run into traffic. She put the basket down. She went to run after the baby. She came back, and somebody had stolen the basket and left the money because the basket had value and the money didn't. So that's all you need to know. And in a world of electronic banking where you don't even have the pieces of paper, you're not adding 3 zeros. You want to add 400 zeros, fine. I don't know. There are people who know an awful lot about the Fed. I have a general vague understanding about the Fed, but I'm not a guy who's on the war horse about the Fed. I suspect if I knew more about the Fed, I would be. But I do not like it. I don't like the looks of it. I don't like anything with that kind of cloudiness. And this business of auditing the Fed is, I think, a fabulous idea. I think if the Fed was audited, it would be made clear to us just exactly how ephemeral and essentially useless this currency thing, this whole debt thing, all of it is working because we have faith still in some vague assumption. But the bottom line is, when people begin to doubt it, then we're in trouble. And as I've said before, when I go and stand in line at a bank, which I don't do very often because I bank online, that's another issue that's a bit of a problem, is not touching the money. But when I go to the bank and I stand in line there, and you see the little plaque there for the FDIC, Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, and it says this account guaranteed up to $100,000, maybe it's $200,000 now, up to $100,000 backed by the full faith and credit of the United States government. When I was a kid or young man, I thought, oh, all right then, I can't go wrong there. Now when I see something that says full faith and credit of the U.S. government, I giggle, I snicker, because we're the brokest country in history. So if people start to realize that this is all a shell game, here's the thing about hyperinflation and about economic collapse. Somebody asked somebody once, how'd you go bankrupt? And the guy said, slowly at first and then very quickly. And that sounds exactly right to me. It's got the ring of truth to me. So what happens is, when this magnitude of this thing reaches a certain point, they will not be able to pretend it doesn't exist anymore. And nobody knows what happens in that case. What seems to have happened historically, I'm not an economist or an economic historian under any circumstances, but what it seems to me has happened in cases like this is that everybody who is owed money has their money at risk, and they know that to get out of the market will be to suppress the value of everything else and start a run, which means they never get their money. So everybody stays in. And then finally comes a point where one of the major players says, all right, if I have to get out dime on the dollar, I'm going to get out now before this is worthless. And when somebody big enough pulls their money out of any kind of a system that's traded as a stock or commodity that's based on confidence and based on people's willingness to buy, once a big player comes out of the game and says, I'm done, everybody follows, because the value goes down and you start this panic buying, and then it's all over. And as I've said also before, we had a depression in the 1930s, but in the 1930s, 50% of the country lived on farms. Everybody lived outdoors. What percentage of the country had electricity during the depression? Not so much as individuals, but as households. Half, people were used to being outside and growing their own food. I don't think most of the kids alive today have never been outside. So we don't know what it's going to look like, but it's not going to be pretty. And that is the premise of the common sense resistance, by the way. That's what happens during Red 17. I really like that. I think of all the things I've got in that book, in that story, that little tiny piece of chrome is my favorite thing, Red 17. What's Red 17? Well, 2017 was called Red 17. And they called it Red 17 because a lot of people died and a lot of things burned. So anyway, that's hyperinflation, Andy. And let's hope we can soft land this thing. It gets less likely every day, but you never know. As long as there's hope, there's hope. And who knows what will happen? Something will happen. But people will still work. People still produce things. People will want to anyway. We'll just, I don't know what the reset's going to be. Let's see. Walter Almeida says EMP. I'm going to try and do this one in 90 minutes tonight. I just really don't have a lot of time on the other end, so we got another 15, 20 minutes to go, something like that. Walter Almeida says EMP, electromagnetic pulse. For those of you who don't know, it's a byproduct of a nuclear explosion. When this goes off, it generates a large electromagnetic pulse, and that this magnetic pulse is large enough and steep enough so that as this magnetic wave propagates itself, if you detonate one in orbit and its significant size, as that expanding sphere of magnetic energy propagates itself downward across the Earth, it doesn't do the slightest bit of damage in terms of there's no heat damage and there's no blast damage. It's outside of the atmosphere. But the magnetic damage, as the magnetic fields hit the wires, electricity is generated by moving a magnetic field down a wire. Basically lassos the electrons and moves them right along. Yep, out the other end it goes. So the magnetic fields drive the free electrons in things like copper downstream, and the faster and more powerful the electron, the magnetic field is, the more electricity you get out of the system. So a generator is simply a spinning series of electromagnets that spin inside of coils of copper wire usually, and then they push the electrons downstream and you have electricity. Well, the problem is that this magnetic pulse from an exploding nuclear device is so large and so crisp, so sharp, that it pushes, the magnetic field pushes all of these electrons down the existing copper wires in regular things like power lines and throughout the circuits on microchips in your car and your phone and transformers and everything. And it basically sets up an enormous burst of electricity in the system that destroys the electronics, just cooks them. Cars won't start because they're all using chips, except pre-85 cars like a Jeep. My friend has a Jeep and she just cranks it, and that'll probably survive, although the solenoids might go too. So the problem with the electromagnetic pulse is, depending on how actually effective it is, I don't think anybody really clearly understands. I'm sure some people do. But what that really means is the United States, like Israel, then becomes a one-bomb country. In other words, if you have one weapon and you have the means to get it, in order for it to be working, it has to be more or less above the horizon, and obviously the more high overhead, the better it is in terms of range, but the higher physically it is away from you, the more the weaker it is because of the inverse square law. So in any event, the theory is that if you could put a nuclear device over the United States and detonate it, you would basically take down the electrical grid, and it wouldn't just be a temporary thing. You would basically cook everything. You, as iron Ironcad points out it's induced current. It induces the current out of the wires, and so everything is gone. And the United States in the flash, literally in a flash, not a single person's killed, and that's another part of why this is a powerful weapon. You see, because if Iran had detonated a nuclear weapon over New York City and killed 1 million people, that would get a nuclear response even from President Peace Prize. But what happens if you detonate a weapon in space and you destroy the U.S. power grids or significant portions of it, and you don't kill a single person immediately? It's certainly an act of war. There's no question about that. Does it get a nuclear response? I don't know. It would if I was president, but there are parking tickets that would get a nuclear response if I was the president. We have such a smart crowd. Somebody just said, Aaron Manning said optimal detonation 75 to 150 miles above sea level. 75 miles above sea level is not even in orbit. But 150 is. So it's low. But it's in space. Certainly 75 miles is outside of virtually all of the atmosphere by density anyway. So there's your problem. You suddenly go from living in a 21st century world to living into a 17th, 18th century world overnight. And this is news to people, but you can't forget the rest of the world, you can't support 300 million people in this country without tractors and combine harvesters and pumps. You might be able to. I don't know if it's certainly not. Certainly the world won't. And then even if you could grow enough food, you can't. Obviously, you can't. You just can't. There's no. Not only is there not enough horsepower to till the fields, there's not any equipment to hook the horses up to. There's probably a few farms that can use a horse, but honest to God, these giant farms are done. All the orchards and stuff are done. You can't get the food out. Even if you had it, you could slaughter all the beef in the country, but you can't deliver the food. You can't refrigerate the food. You suddenly have these population centers with 10 or 15 million people in them. The farms will be fine. The countryside will be okay, as the countryside was in the 1800s, because it was all countryside. There were no cities as we understand them. There were towns and stuff, but they weren't really cities. What do you do in New York? Just think about this. What do you do in New York City if the electricity goes out and you can't use an elevator? What do you do if you live on the 60th floor, 70th floor of one of these apartment buildings? Just in the interim. And the tragic part about the EMP is the interim is not going to be a week or a month without electricity. You would simply lose the ability to move and power things for years. Because, all of our elected officials, but specifically this guy, we're going to spend $800 billion on a stimulus package. You could have stockpiled transformers, and you could have put in circuit breaking measures to protect. It's called hardening. You could harden the electrical grid. You could have done it, but you didn't. So it's going to be, if it happens, it'll be a catastrophe. Catastrophe is not the word for it. It'll be the end of everything that we understand, because it will destroy the U.S. economy overnight, and the destruction of the U.S. economy means the destruction of the world economy. And we will all be third world people together. Income inequality will simply disappear. We'll all be living in the mud together. So it'd be nice if that didn't happen. Now, I don't know what the power of the EMP is. I do know that there were large numbers of above-ground nuclear tests, 100 at least, in Las Vegas, and didn't seem to have much effect. People used to come out of the casinos to watch them. Now, these were most of these weapons were extremely low yield, but I do know, and I've seen the video of it. By the way, if you can find it on YouTube, look up the video for nuclear detonation in space. It is simply the most beautiful thing you've ever seen. It's like a giant flower. It looks nothing like the in atmosphere mushroom cloud. It's a blue veined spectacular spiderwebby thing. It's like somebody cracked a blue marble. Really beautiful to see. That's a nuclear explosion in space. I think it's on YouTube. You can find it if you look. But EMP is the end of the world as we know it. Up against this horror and all of this thing, you do find out that when the NSA and people like that are doing the job that they were supposed to be doing, which is protecting us from the bad guys who don't live in the country or who live outside the country. And by the way, I don't even have a problem with the NSA spying on bad guys in the country. I just don't want them spying on the good guys. in order to catch the bad guys. That's the fundamental difference to me. But it's become just known to me through just some of the military people I talk with and stuff that we have radiation detection devices of such spectacular subtlety that if a container ship were to round, Cape of Good Hope, 300 miles off the coast, and it was carrying anything the size of a warhead, we would be able to detect it through the container ship, through the container. We have extraordinarily sophisticated devices, and thank God for that. And as always, it's the defense playing the offense, and, as the NSA-type people and the CIA people say, we have to win every time, and they only have to win once. And that's it. Aaron Manning, who seems to certainly know what he's talking about, said Central Pacific atmospheric detonations knocked out power in Chile several times. So I'm sure if you were to specifically detonate the correct yield, and I'm sure the type of warhead is very important. I'm certain that you can create a warhead that is a high EMP yield warhead, the same way you can create a neutron bomb. It's a high neutron yield weapon. So there you go. And I think Karsten Mueller 16 here said it's Operation Dominique. It's the nuclear explosion in space. So if you want to search for Operation Dominique, that might be cool to see. I loved all those, Abel and Baker and all these different code names they had for those weapons tests. They're really kind of interesting. The last thing I'll say about nuclear explosions and nuclear energy and nuclear weapons and all this other stuff is, if there is one thing that is overhyped in this society and over-feared, it's nuclear energy. Now, needless to say, in the same manner that I call for the immediate murder and execution of California people entering Texas, people who are capable of taking that seriously are capable of taking anything else seriously too. I'm not trying to suggest for an instant that if you find yourself underneath a nuclear fireball, it's going to be a good day. I'm not saying that at all. I am saying, however, that when you ask people, I bet if you went out on the street and said, which country in the world has suffered the most nuclear damage, they would, to a man, would say Japan, if they knew it all. Japan. Yeah, how many bombs were dropped on Japan? How many nuclear weapons were detonated in the air, in the skies over Japan? 2. You know how many nuclear weapons were detonated in the skies over the United States? It's 100. 100 nuclear weapons. 101 if you count Trinity, and I do. 101 nuclear explosions in the air and on the ground in the United States, on U.S. territory, almost exclusively in Nevada. Over 100. And there's another 900 that went down underground. If you take a look at the fatal blast radius for the Hiroshima bomb, and there's a couple of map apps that allow you to do this. They'll allow you to pick a Google map area, just put your dot anywhere you want, and then calculate the various rings of destruction based on the size of the yield of the weapon. If you put the Hiroshima bomb at the control tower at LAX airport, the fatal blast radius does not leave the airport boundary. In other words, that bomb is relatively speaking so small that if you detonated it in the center of LAX, the fatal blast area stays within the airport boundaries. The Hiroshima and Nagasaki were rice paper structures. They were literally made out of paper and bamboo. You had a lot of and the density of the people were very, very high. Lots and lots and lots of people living in extremely flimsy structures, very closely packed together. And I'm not trying to say that an atomic bomb is a fun thing at all. But I am saying that when people think about a nuclear weapon detonating over Los Angeles, even if it's an H-bomb, they think the whole city's just scoured off the face of the earth. It just didn't happen that way. It just doesn't. So it's important, I think, that just people... I just want people to be informed, right? I just want people to have some fundamental understanding of what's really going on. When they had the meltdown about the Fukishima reactor, I mean, what happened there? That thing was designed to take a magnitude 9 earthquake. A magnitude 9 is inconceivable. Inconceivable. And it was a 9.1. So it exceeded the it wasn't just a once in a century earthquake, it was a once in a millennium earthquake, and it hit. And it turns out that that reactor would have been fine. It would have survived the earthquake. It would have survived that magnitude 9 thing just fine. The one thing that they didn't anticipate at Fukushima was that the tsunami would take out the backup diesel cooling devices. That's the one thing they hadn't considered. So they had a backup for the backup. The containment held, and then they were going to use diesel powered pumps to get the water in there to keep the thing cool until the thing could get repaired. They did not count on the fact that the diesel engines would be taken out by the tsunami, by the wave. But the point I'm trying to make here with Fukushima is, to as far as the extent of my knowledge, I don't think anybody's died from that reactor. 16,000 people, was it, died in the wave? And all we talk about is the radiation. We don't talk a word about the 16,000 people who were killed by this tsunami blast. We're worried about the people who were sick from radiation from this catastrophe. And by the way, yet again, when you look at, apparently, again, I'm not an expert on this, but just to have kind of cursory layman's knowledge, it looks like what the actions that the company took, that the Japanese government and the electric company took, were actions that were trying to save the reactor, trying to preserve it, in other words. And if they'd simply just flooded it, then we wouldn't even be talking about it. Somebody just pointed out, both Hiroshima and Nagasaki are beautiful, beautiful rebuilt cities, and they didn't have to wait through through 70 years of zombies to make it. They just rebuilt it. And now, if you combine Hiroshima and Detroit, you tell me which city got nuked. So the point I'm trying to make about Fukushima and about understanding risk so that you can make intelligent decisions is simply this. It was pointed out to me, and I don't doubt this for an instant, that if you were to evacuate a village that was 10 kilometers away from Fukushima, and in order to get them away from the danger of radiation from this plant, you put them on an airplane and flew them to Los Angeles, they'd take more radiation on the flight to Los Angeles than they would have taken if they'd stayed there in Fukushima. Because you get a pretty good radiation dose when you spend an hour or two in the stratosphere, and if you spend 12 hours in the stratosphere, you get a better one, and if you spend 18, you get even more. So this is all I'm saying. This idea that detectable amounts of radiation, we can detect the amount of energy is being distributed from the Voyager probe, and it's in interstellar space. This is the kind of thing that I'm talking about. We have the kind of sensitivity where it's detectable amounts of radiation. It's like, what does that mean? You know, if you were to walk through Grand Central Station in New York City, and millions of people do every week. I don't know how many do a day. Probably millions. Hundreds of thousands without question. Walk through Grand Central Station every day. The radiation levels inside of Grand Central Station are well in excess of what would ever be tolerated on the control room of a nuclear reactor. Far, far higher than those in the control room of a nuclear reactor. And the reason is because there's so much granite in Grand Central Station, and granite contains a fair amount of uranium, just basically radiates radiation. And the point of this is that your body is designed to absorb and take a significant lots of radiation. And if we weren't able to deal with the radiation, we all would have been dead a long, long time ago. Our bodies, other animals' bodies, deal with damage done by radiation. The ground is radioactive. There's cosmic rays coming down from the sky. Bananas have so much potassium in them that they're radioactive too. Nobody ever is like screaming and yelling and grabbing bananas out of kids' hands, but they will in California, especially. You just wait and see. When people understand in the future that bananas are radioactive, and when somebody decides to make an issue out of it, when some legislator gets his hand on it, they're going to start banning bananas because they're radioactive, and people are going to have hysteria, fits, just fits. Because people are frightened of things because there is no press. There's nobody to tell them what the risk is. There's no one to tell them that the radiation levels in Fukushima are lower than they would be if we evacuated the entire town in a jet airplane to LA. That's all you need to know. And Dave Olson, our loyal and trustworthy Dave Olson over there, talks about a word that's an interesting word called homeosis. And homeosis is the idea that if you give an organism a radiation dose, a low-level radiation dose, constantly, and you just keep upping it, you can, in fact, activate the body's repair mechanisms so that the repair mechanisms are now working at an enhanced rate, and if you do this homeostasis carefully, which is the way you would want to do it, you can actually sort of pre-build up a human body's resistance to radiation to a remarkable degree, really remarkable degree, how much radiation you can take, especially once you get those repair mechanisms activated. So that's all I'm saying. I'm saying, I want to be afraid of the things that are worth being afraid of, and if it turns out that cows kill more people than sharks by an order of 10, or whatever the number is, that's important to me. That's how I'm going to make my risk evaluations. No more surfing in the cow patties for me. Those days are done. I'm just not going to take that kind of risk. So anyway, let's see. I got a couple more, and I can do another 20 minutes, half hour. See a couple here that I liked, just like the sound of. Why not? At least I know something about. I work from the bottom up. I told you there were 3 movies involved. I remember what the third one is. Shane Clark asked Ceres, and it's not series as in movie series. Ceres as in the asteroid, the planetoid Ceres, the largest of the minor planets. We've got a probe that has left Vesta and is on its way to Ceres. I should get there next year, I think. And Ceres is a remarkable little world. It's spherical. It's big compared to other asteroids. Vesta was very big compared to other asteroids. Ceres is twice or 3 or 4 times the size of Vesta. And I'm very, very, very anxious to get that probe in orbit around Ceres. I remember when, I think it was 2001, when the probe went into orbit around Eros, and you got high-resolution maps for months on an asteroid. And they kept taking it down lower and lower and lower and lower and lower, and then finally they landed it on the surface of the asteroid. It didn't have landing gear. It didn't have a descent stage. They just used its maneuvering thrusters. The gravity is a 10,000th of the gravity on the Earth. And they just basically, when the mission was over, they said, can we land it on the thing? Let's try. So they did, and they got a signal. Bless their hearts. Ceres. Ceres is interesting, and the reason I'm interested in it is because Aurora is a series of movies. It's a franchise in its perfect world. It's a science fiction franchise universe like Star Trek or Star Wars or something, Babylon 5. And the first movie is Aurora, which is basically the as always, it's the Genesis myth, right? It's the backstory. Here, how do we get here? What's the story to get us into the world? But the second movie that I want to do is called Ice Station Ceres. It's a nod to a kind of a cool Cold War movie called Ice Station Zebra, and Ice Station Ceres is interesting because we know for a fact that Ceres has a lot of liquid water on it, a lot. Some estimates are it's got more liquid water on it than the Great Lakes, and some estimates are it has more fresh liquid water than any place else on Earth, fresh water. Ceres is an interesting candidate. Water is perfect. Water, you need water in space. It's a gas station, basically. If we can find water in significant quantities, especially in significant concentrations in the solar system, then we literally no longer have our problem of we got to go from St. Louis to California and back in a Conestoga wagon, and we got to carry the supplies on the wagon because there's literally nothing between here and there. That's essentially the problem we have today. We got to go from St. Louis to the Pacific Coast and back in a Conestoga wagon, and we got to carry every single drop of water and every single bit of food that we're going to take with us, in air in the case of space. If, on the other hand, if we can find water in the solar system, then we are in enormously better shape. Because if you can find water, you get 3 things out of it. If you have a nuclear rocket, which I would, you have a reaction mass. You have something that you can push through the heated core to get a reaction. Water is okay for that. Hydrogen, liquid hydrogen, is far better. It's a much better thing to do. So if you have a nuclear rocket, you have a nuclear reactor, this is Aurora, you land on a comet and you refuel. And you refuel by getting the water out of the comet, which in itself is an interesting challenge. And I felt like I did a good job with that, and we'll find out. But if you can get the water out of the asteroid, then you can, with your nuclear reactor, you can disassociate the water into its component oxygen and hydrogen. The oxygen goes into the habitat and provides oxygen for your crew. The hydrogen is in liquid form, is sent back to the fuel tanks where it's used to go through the core of the nuclear rocket liquid hydrogen has the best ISP, the best specific impulse, and the best efficiency. Methane is better than water and not as good as liquid hydrogen. So liquid hydrogen is the fuel for your rocket. Technically speaking, it's the reaction mass. The fuel is actually the uranium in the engine core. But if you can find water out there, and of course with water you can drink water. And another thing that water, people don't put too much attention to, but water is in fact a superb radiation shield. It's really excellent. That's why we bury our current nuclear reactors in a big pool of water. Water is fantastic at preserving, preventing high energy radiation. So if you can find water, you can put water in the outer shell of the habitat to shield you against radiation from the outside. You can turn it into oxygen. You can turn it into liquid hydrogen that you use for your reaction mass, and you can drink it. You don't have to carry it all. There you go. So Ceres is an interesting place, and the reason I think you guys might get a kick out of this is because in the second movie, not in the first movie at all, but in the second movie, it starts with a base on Ceres, and the base just suddenly disappears. It goes dark, and they think it's there. You know, some people are saying it's a meteor storm, which is absurd. Meteor storms do not exist, but they take a look at the feed that comes down from their station. It's an ice station. They've got a base on Ceres, and all the base does is drills down into the core, pulls up the liquid water, cracks it into liquid hydrogen and oxygen, and knocks it up into orbit around Ceres, which you could probably throw, literally. And it's a fueling stop. It's a fuel station, and it's a fuel station that's not in the bottom of a deep gravity well, so you don't have to get it off the surface of the Earth or even the surface of the Moon. You literally just push it off because there's essentially zero gravity on even Ceres. Is probably just a 200th of a G. So you got a big blob of water out there, and that gets you everywhere you want to go. So our good guys in movie 2 start out with a base on Ceres, and they're just cracking water and pumping it out, and suddenly the base goes dark, and they look at the telemetry that came back, and it all happens in the space of just a half a second or so. But if you break it down into milliseconds, they find out that the sensors are failing in a wave across the base. So the most distant part of the base's telemetry fails first, and then just a few microseconds later, the other ones, and half a second or a second later, it comes in and takes the whole base out. Well, it turns out that it's not a meteor storm. It's a kinetic weapon shotgun blast, basically, launched by the Chinese. And in movie 2, in Ice Station Ceres, it's not that America goes to war with China. It's that Aurora Aerospace, 300 engineers, go to war with China. And so we get some space combat, and we get space combat in a way that will make it interesting. The reason I want to produce my own movies is because I don't want to write a story where I have weapons, where beam weapons are not visible, and there is no noise in space, and there's no blast wave, and there's no diving, and there's no aerodynamics. I don't want to write a movie where you have all that stuff in there, and some producers say, we got to add a screaming sound effect, we got to add laser beams. You can't. The audience won't know what you're talking about if you have laser beams and you don't see the beams. You'll see the beams when they hit the hull, and you'll see the beams when they start coming through the countermeasures, through a glitter cloud or dust cloud or sand casters, they called it in Traveler, and pop some particles out there to diffuse this incoming laser beam. So basically the fun thing about it is you've got the American ship is the underdog. It's much smaller. The Chinese have built a battleship, and it's a laser weapon on the Chinese vessel. Their strategy is do a lot of damage at long range, even though the individual laser damage is not catastrophic the way a kinetic energy weapon would be. Just keep poking holes at it at long range, and then eventually you're just going to win. And the Americans were just determined to go up there and avenge themselves, basically. Decide, well, we can't do that. We don't have the time. We're going to use a kinetic energy weapon. We're going to use a slug. And in order to, if you have a hockey puck moving at 20,000 miles an hour, and it hits something, it's going to mess that thing up. So the kinetic weapon is much more powerful. It's a much stronger punch, especially if you've got a bunch of shotguns, like ball bearings is probably ideal. Canister of ball bearings, and the ship flies through that, and if the closure rate is high enough and you got 10,000, 20,000 miles an hour difference between the two, couple of cans of ball bearings, all it takes, and that Chinese ship's vaporized. So What you've got now is you've got an interesting situation where you have one vehicle with a much longer reach but a much weaker hit, and you've got the other vehicle whose only strategy is to get through this, take this punishment, and get into close range and then deliver a knockout blow at close range. And it's got a bunch of neat reversals in it. I don't want to get too much in the details of the other thing because it's all about subterfuge and false systems and stuff. But anyway, Ice Age Ceres is going to be the movie where we go to war with China. The Chinese people want this movie real bad because if you've ever been in chat rooms where there are Chinese people, they're the most imperialistic, jingoistic. You just can't imagine. My understanding is that the PLA, the People's Liberation Army, pays people to kind of buff up China in everywhere on the web. So if you see a video demonstration of an F-35, you'll see some guy saying the F-35 is nothing compared to, was it the J-20, the Chinese stealth thing? You know, it's like it's actually kind of hilarious. But if this were a studio movie and you're trying to do a movie about going to war with China, it simply will not be made. And Hollywood will try to stop this movie. And so will China, because they don't want to be perceived as the enemy. They want to just buy everything first. So, yeah. So that's a fun thing about having your own movie studio. You get to say the things you want to do and the stories you want to tell. So, yeah, so thanks, Shane. Ceres, yeah. It's an interesting place, and we're going to go there in movie number 2, which will be movie number 4 if Common Sense Resistance and Big Bad happen first. I'll just go through some of these real quick. Stephen Dakota Tucker, color? Sure, why not? And presumably that means my favorite color. That's how I'm going to take it anyway. Electric blue for the longest time was my favorite color, and now I really like silver a lot. My car is silver, I like silver, and I still like electric blue very much. It's got to be a bright blue. I think navy blue is one of my least favorite colors. I'm starting to like reds better than I did before. I'm never really much of a red fan, but I'm on the red team, so I'm getting a little more comfortable with that. I cannot stand yellow. And the only colors that I generally just make me crazy are the earth tones of olives and brown. Brown, you know, brown is nothing. I think I have one potential brown outfit, and that's old, and it's on its way out. I don't like beige. I don't like brown shoes. I don't like any of the earth tones, but especially brown. So if it's a choice between tans and beiges and olives, I'm definitely on the cooler side of that. I'll go with blacks and grays and even like pale purples and that sort of thing. I like the cooler colors a lot better than the earth tones. I just can't stand them. Yeah, I would say silver is probably my favorite color. Gray, I wear a lot of gray. Got a lot of gray suits, and if I look at all the stuff in my closet, it's all either black, darker than blue, like a midnight blue maybe. I like grays. I like gray suits a lot. I like that kind of material. So that's it. I still think, however, every now and then I'll see some just like genuinely like an electric blue, like wow, and that's pretty impressive. But I had a choice for the car, and I went with silver on the car. And if I were to get another car, I'd get silver again. I toyed around with the gunmetal, the darker gray, but the silver is just so beautiful. Anyway, that's my favorite color, silver and then blue. Dan Larrabee asks, Barbarella? Had to take that one. Jane Fonda is an awful person, but Jane Fonda fundamentally is a stupid person. Jane Fonda has a history, from those who know her, of being passionately committed to whatever cause her current boyfriend or husband is passionately committed to. And she's moved around a lot. And I got to be friends with Johnny Voight's, one of the signature achievements in my life, and spent a lot of time talking with him. And John spent a period right after he was discovered in Midnight Cowboy. And as soon as he did Midnight Cowboy and just arrived intact on the scene as a force, as a movie star, and he's gigantic. He's 6'3" or 4", and great looking guy. And John said, as soon as we made Midnight Cowboy and people had heard of me and people knew who I was, he was just immediately just seduced and recruited by the left. Tom Hayden and all these left wingers would just globbed onto him, pulled him aside, and started talking about how awesome communism was and leftism and the revolution and Fidel and Che. And John said, we're actors. What do we know about that? We don't know anything about that. It sounds good to us. What do we know? And everybody's very passionate about it, and they're really smart and seem smart. And I suspect that happened to Jane Fonda. Henry Fonda is about all as American as you can get, and apparently they had a big split stuff. Anyway, I'm not trying to excuse her because individual adults make individual choices, and that's what they do. All of that to simply say that there's a scene early in Barbarella where she is lying down. I don't know if she's naked, but she's in one of those outfits, and I think that is the most beautiful woman that has ever walked the earth. There's just a scene there where it just hurts your eyes. She's so pretty in Barbarella. A lot of scenes where she's that pretty, but one or two I remember just going, oh my God. Oh my God. So, that was a long time ago. And it's a strange movie. I almost said a stupid movie, but it's not. It was very French, right? It's very odd. But my God, Jane Fonda in Barbarella is, who's going to touch that today? In my opinion, the only person out there that's as good-looking as Jane Fonda was in Barbarella today is another left-wing lunatic, and that's Charlize Theron, who's recently just hooked up with Sean Penn. So hopefully they can go down to Venezuela together and dance on the graves of all the people he was murdered, and look at all the poverty that was created by the policy that they advocate. But she's a gigantic left-winger, too. But Charlize Theron is just painfully good-looking, and even in Prometheus she was great-looking. She was great-looking in Cider House Rules. She's stunning. So that's Barbarella. Yeah. My God. Let's see. I'll do two more. Marianne. Hi, Marianne. How are you? Heard the professor died. That's a shame. I always liked him. He was one of my favorites. Russell Johnson. He was, I guess, I don't think, who do men identify with when they watch Gilligan's Island, right? If you're watching Gilligan's Island and you're a female, you have two choices. You're going to either be Ginger or Marianne. Very few people identified with Lovey Howell. If you're a man watching Gilligan's Island, you're not going to be the skipper, and you're sure as hell not going to be Gilligan. You really don't want to be Thurston Howell. Everybody wants to be the professor. So, anyway, where did that come from? Jingoism. Marianne, sorry. Marianne. So Jingoism. Jingoism is a kind of common definition of the sort of rampant, out-of-control nationalism. It's a kind of nationalism. It's the kind of nationalism that is irrational. It's my country, right or wrong. And as Mark Twain said, that is the most appalling statement of all time. I agree with Mark Twain on this. If you're wrong, you're wrong, and you owe it to the country to correct the wrong. This my country, right or wrong thing I don't buy. But the difference between me and progressives is progressives think the country's wrong all the time. I think we're wrong very infrequently, and we try our best to correct it when we are wrong. At least it's been our pattern in the past. But jingoism is an interesting term because of where it comes from, and I don't know how many people know where it comes from, but I know where it comes from. Jingoism is a term that was developed during the people we talked about earlier, during the Victorian age of the British Empire. And it comes from, I don't remember the second half. It was a little dog or a little piece of poetry, and it was something like, we do not want to fight them, but by jingo if we do, we've got the guns, we've got the men, we've got the money too. By jingo if we do, we've got the men, we've got the guns, we got the money too. So that's where it came from, and I just think that's a really cool kind of a little thing. That's that's a civilization at the height of its confidence, at the height of its powers, doing some some people say doing great harm, and there's no denying that, but doing great good as well. And you can talk about all people. Look, I just want balance, right? When you want balance, I just want an accurate picture of things. That's all I want. That's all I ask for. I'm not defending British atrocities in India. I'm not defending them. Was it? I forget where the massacre was, where they basically just opened fire on a group of people peacefully protesting Indians. I'm not justifying that. I'm not saying it's okay. I'm not saying it's we got to break a few eggs. I'm not saying that at all. It's a horrific massacre crime. But what I am saying is, if you look at the British in India and you count the 100 people or 200 or 400 or 500 people who were killed that way, and whatever other people that were killed by this, then you also have to factor in how many lives were saved by the implementation of a British system of law. The Thuggees were murdering thousands and thousands and thousands of people every single year for centuries. I just want some balance. I want both sides of the story to be told. So anyway, I just heard the term Jingoism, and I love it. My personal take on the modern definition of Jingoism, this irrational, mindless sort of nationalism, is I don't agree with mindless nationalism. I don't believe in this idea that America is automatically right. I do believe, on some level, that in a crisis, whether she's right or not, I'm going to support her, because there are some things that trump even reason. And there's not a lot of things that trump reason, but this may be one of them. Best way I can describe my opinion about Jingoism in defense of national character is pretty much this. If I'm at a dinner party and I'm married to somebody who I deeply love and admire and really genuinely care for, and this wife of mine is at a dinner party, and either she's drunk or she's not, or she gets into an argument with somebody, and she comes under a lot of attack, and people are yelling and screaming at her, and she's wrong. I'm not going to yell and scream at her. I'm going to take her side, and then at home I'll tell her she's wrong. And if you can understand what I'm saying there, then you understand how I feel about this country. I will rush to the defense of my country and assume that she's right. And if it turns out that she's wrong, then that's something for us to fix. That's something for us Americans to fix. If she's under attack, certainly if she's under attack, she's automatically right as far as I'm concerned until proven otherwise. But yeah, I'm not ashamed of being a patriot. I'm not ashamed of the flag. I'm not ashamed of loving America. I'm not ashamed of defending America. I defend America as well as I can, and I'm amazed at how easy it is to defeat the people that criticize America. I'm amazed at how easy it is to defeat them. So I don't have the slightest problem with it. I don't consider myself a jingoist. I consider myself a patriot, and I consider myself very pro-American. But I don't consider that jingoism. Some people would call me a jingoist. They can call me what they want to. They're wrong. I can show them why. Last one, I think. I like this one too, from T.M. Smith, and it's Bernoulli. Bernoulli is an Italian scientist. He's kind of the unsung hero of the modern world in a lot of ways. Every time you get in an airplane, you are being magically lofted. I think I understand more about flying certainly than any 100,000 other passengers, and maybe more about flying than, I don't know more than 1 million passengers, because there's a lot of pilots out there. But I know more about the dynamics of what happens in an airplane than just about anybody. And I think I'm the most amazed of all. Every single time I fly, I get a window seat. Every single time I get a window seat. And every single time I look out the window. And more often than not, I'm getting a good look at the wing. And every time that airplane rotates at 160, 180 knots or whatever, I am just amazed and delighted. I'm just smiling. And I fly a lot. I mean, it's not like, I fly a lot. I've taken hundreds and hundreds of commercial flights. And every single time they taxi onto the runway and they just hold there for a second, every time you feel the power coming up, every time those throttles start to run, every time those engines come to full power and you start to accelerate, I just start grinning like an idiot, like a fool. Start grinning like an idiot. And down we go, down the runway, boom, boom, faster, faster, faster. Boom, 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 boom. 160, 180 knots, whatever the number is, the nose comes up and then it sits on the mains for a while, the angle of attack increases, and then it just elevates, it just rises. And nobody thinks about why. But one of the things I wanted to take Bernoulli for is that people do not understand this medium that we live in. I keep talking, I guess this is my bitch and moan session for the bitching moaning episode. But, and you're welcome, Marianne. But people need to understand these things. And one of the things, not just Bernoulli's principle, which provides the lift on the airplane that makes you be able to go visit Grandma during Thanksgiving. People don't understand the power of the atmosphere. They don't understand how dense this atmosphere, this medium that we move through really is. We assume the air is completely intangible. We assume the air is we act as if we live in a vacuum, and essentially we do. For all intents and purposes, moving at the speeds of animals. Some animals have to deal with aerodynamic drag, but we're not one of them. Maybe the fastest runners in the world do, but by and large, you walk down the street, you're moving so slowly relative to the air molecules that drag is essentially non-existent. You might as well be walking through a vacuum. If you had a backpack on and you were walking through a vacuum, you wouldn't notice any difference, really, no noticeable difference. So we think of the air as being very, very, very ethereal, and ethereal means ether, but very thin and not of any consequence. And the idea that the air, that the atmosphere could be as dense as concrete is utterly, utterly, utterly impossible for us to visualize unless you really think about it. But when you look at explosions, especially conventional explosions, in a humid atmosphere, you can see it when you look down on some of those footage from the Vietnam War, these expanding rings, and you can see it also in some bomb videos. You can actually see this bubble of expanding air that's coming outside of an explosion. And people think, well, the building got knocked down. What knocked down the building? People think that when a bomb goes off, it's the fire that knocks down the building, but it's not the fire. The fire's got nothing to do with it. The fire of the explosion is essentially, it's not in the picture for virtually all of the damage that gets done. What knocks down buildings and kills people is this blast wave of compressed air. The air gets compressed so much that the air gets pushed, and the air molecules get pushed so tightly together, and the resistance on the other side of the explosion is so great that the air assumes the density of solid matter for a few seconds or milliseconds or whatever the case may be. It is like an expanding bubble of concrete is coming out of that explosion, and that force hits a building and knocks in all the windows and knocks the building down if the overpressure is enough. So you measure the pressure on a building in pounds per square inch. How many extra pounds per square inch is it pushing against that building? And it's the air. It's the air that knocks it down. So we move so slowly through the air that we assume that the air is just simply not there. But there's not a kid that I ever knew that didn't, at some point in his life, driving in a station wagon or in a car, roll down the windows, put his hand outside the window, and then start increasing the angle of attack on your hand so that you start doing this. And if you start increasing the angle of attack on your hand goes up. It doesn't go back. It wants to go back anyway. That's just parasite drag. But if you start to increase the angle of attack, just at 60, 70 miles an hour, you can feel your arm getting pushed back by the drag and also going up, because the air is flowing over the top of your hand, which is functioning as a wing, and there's a low pressure area on the top of your hand, and it's pulling you up. So the way to think about flying, when I try to tell people about flying, and I teach a lot of people flying, is that if you think about the strongest car vacuum you've ever experienced at a car wash, the best one you ever had, and some of these things have pulled the blood right out of your hand, right? You know, and just lurches onto your hand. And you try to pull this off the wall or something. If you imagine, and the thing's got an aperture this big, right? If you imagine that you've got 60,000 of these things on every surface of the vertical surface of the wing, you've got just car vacuum, pushed together against each other, so that the entire surface of the wing is nothing but thousands and thousands of hoses with this gigantic vacuum above them, then all of a sudden it's not so hard to imagine lifting the airplane off of the ground using thousands and thousands and thousands of car vacuums that are sucking onto the top of the wing. And that's exactly precisely what happens. It's just that you don't have the tube. That's exactly precisely what happens. It's that pressure. So the pressure on the top of the wing is very low. The pressure on the bottom of the wing is at least atmospheric pressure, usually a little bit higher. And it pulls the wing up like the same way that the vacuum pulls it. And we don't realize any of this stuff. A drinking straw. Do I have one here? I got the water. I don't think I have a straw here. Use a drinking straw, right? And you take a drink. You don't think twice about it, but you think that somehow you suck the water up into your mouth or the Coke. But it's not really what's happening. What's happening is when you suck on a drinking straw, you're reducing the air pressure inside the straw, but the air pressure on the top of the drink is still the same. So the air pressure on the top of the drink is pushing the drink down. And if you're not sucking on the straw, if the straw is just sitting in the cup, you got the air pressure, ambient air pressure over the liquid pushing the drink down, and you got the ambient air pressure in the straw pushing back, and so it's steady state. You suck on a straw, you're really just reducing the air pressure in that straw by just a tiny little bit. And the air pressure on the drink pushes the liquid up through the straw. And it's a miracle. It's a miracle. And and the great thing about this procedure, which was determined, it wasn't discovered by Bernoulli, but he did. I don't think it was discovered by Bernoulli. I think Bernoulli did the math on it. That air will flow around a curved surface, and as it does, the air molecules begin to gap. They start to separate, and as they separate, that is the definition of lower air pressure, and the pressure difference between the bottom of the wing and the top of the wing will lift a 747 with 1,000,000 pounds. 1,000,000 pounds. Up it goes. Absolutely amazing. It's absolutely amazing. And all the control surfaces work the same way too. Even the rudder, which is basically just a wing at a right angle, the rudder is neutral to aerodynamic drag, but when you put the rudder out there, part of the rudder sticks into the airflow and wants to be pushed back and pushes the tail back, but most of the work of the rudder is on the part of the side that the air doesn't see, because now the rudder's curving away from the vertical stabilizer, and that's creating curve, which means vacuum, and that vacuum pulls the tail rather than pushes the tail. That's where most of it comes from. Bernoulli sucks. That's how it works. Planes fly because the air sucks. It's a pressure differential. But the power of the air is unbelievable. And you just look at an explosion, what an explosion does. It's not metal coming at you, and it's not wood. It's air that's so compressed that it feels like air, like metal or wood. So I just love these kind of things. I do this kind of science stuff all day. It's really, really fun to talk about these kind of things. Bernoulli really developed them. And I should know this, and I don't. One thing I do know for an absolute certain fact was that the reason the Wright brothers were the first to fly is because the Wright brothers were the first ones to look at flying as a scientific problem to be solved practically, not an engineering problem or even a design problem. A bunch of people, Otto Lilienthal prominent among them, preceded the Wright brothers, and Otto Lilienthal had built gliders, hang gliders basically, and he was running off a hill and he'd glide. Okay, that's not flight. It's not powered flight, but it is a form of flying. Certainly you're covering distance as well as going down, so it's a form of flying. So when the Wright brothers first went out there, I'm sorry, did I say 1,000,000 pounds? Maybe it's more like 480,000 pounds. Viper Jack, who happens to be an F-16 pilot, is going to lecture me on aviation. But when the Wright brothers went to first build their first flyer, their first gliders, and they didn't start with a powered airplane. They went with basics, started with kites, and they started to build a little unmanned glider and then manned gliders. And they went out to Kitty Hawk, and they went to Kitty Hawk from Ohio. They lived in Ohio. They went all the way down to North Carolina because Kitty Hawk had the highest regularly sustained winds that they could find. Winds hitting the dunes would go up, and that's generating not lift in the true sense, but it's generating a form of lift where the air is moving upwards. Mountain, it's a ridge lift. Thermal lift is another kind of lift where the air goes up. But what that did was helping them, was buying them more time, basically, because a glider in rising air will stay in the air longer than a glider in steady air will, because the air is taking the glider up as the glider comes down. By the way, for those of you who are interested, because once we get on flying, you can't stop me. I was a glider pilot for a long time, and here's a question for you: How does a glider that releases from the tow plane at 2,000 feet climb to 10,000 feet? How does that happen? Does the glider go up through the air? No, gliders can't go up. They don't have any power source. What happens when you're in a thermal or use thermal lift, a rising pocket of air, to go from 2,000 feet to 10,000 feet? The way that works is your glider is always descending. It's always descending. It has to descend through the air to maintain its forward velocity. It's efficient, but it's not magical. Glider can't just go up through the air. Glider's always coming down through the air mass, always. But if you have a powerful enough thermal, what's happening is that pocket of air is rising faster than the glider is descending through it. So if you imagine a ball rolling down the stairs, that's what the glider's doing. But if you imagine an escalator, and the escalator's running really fast, then the escalator is actually taking that falling ball upwards, because as the ball goes down, drops, the ball's always coming down relative to the stairs, but if the stairs themselves are moving up fast enough, the ball, which is constantly descending, will in fact go up. And that's basically how gliders gain lift. But that's the kind of lift that's determined by the atmosphere, not the kind of lift that comes off the top of a wing. Anyway, my whole point with Bernoulli was the Wright brothers went out there, and air tables of pressure differentials have been devised. And as Amendment 10 points out, it's off of Kill Devil Hill. So air pressure tables had been devised, and the Wright brothers built their first flyers, their first gliders, based on existing air pressure gradients and tables. And they got out to Kill Devil Hills out in Kitty Hawk, and they got on their gliders, and the things just fell out of the sky. They just came down. They didn't work at all. At all. And what the Wright brothers did was they had the practical mindedness. They had the practical mindedness to understand that one of two things was happening. Either they had built the wing so completely incompetently that it wasn't working, they knew that wasn't the case, or the pressure tables were wrong. And that's exactly what happened. They realized that the pressure tables were optimistic. I don't remember if it was a factor of 50% or 300%. It was something big, some major overestimation of how much lift they were going to get. So they basically, here's why the Wright brothers succeeded instead of anybody else. If you had been the Wright brothers, if I'd been one of the Wright brothers, and I find out, man, these pressure tables have to be smaller, they're not working. They're underreporting how much lift we're getting. We should be getting more lift than we're getting according to these tables. I would simply, okay, I'll just make a bigger wing. But that's not what the Wright brothers did. The Wright brothers said, if we're going to understand this and engineer it throughout the course of our career, we can't just slap a bigger wing on there. We have to understand what the actual values are before we do any more building. So the Wright brothers not only built the first flying airplane, the Wright brothers also built the first wind tunnel. The Wright brothers said, all right, look, we're not just going to go dick around out there. This is what it really comes down to, right? This is what everybody else was doing. They're dicking around. Yeah, it's got a boat with it. Well, it's got a wing. It looks like a seagull. All right, well, it's not working. Well, let's dick around and put a tail on it and make it look like feathers. Is that working? Nah. Yeah, well, why don't we, we'll dick around and we'll make the wings flap. These guys didn't dick around. They basically just said, all right, our air pressure tables are the whole thing. Everything depends on the science of the Bernoulli principle of lift being caused by accelerating air on the top of the wing. So the Wright brothers said, instead of us just going out there and dicking around, let's get the real numbers. And once we have the real numbers, we can design for the rest of our lives. And that's exactly what they did. They built by hand in their bicycle shop a wooden tunnel, and they built a mechanical fan to drive this thing, and then they built little cross sections of their wings, and they suspended them by wires. And these things were little tiny little things. The model wings were about this big. And they suspended them by a wire, and they had a certain wing shape and a certain angle of attack, which is the angle at which the wing curvature is more or less set. Flaps change the curvature of the wing, and so do slats. But for the time being, assume we got a fabric wing, and it's more or less set in its curvature. So they would mount that, and then they change the angle at which the wing intercepted the incoming air, called the relative wind. And they began to just with a little measure, they just had a little tiny little scale, and they're measuring how much lighter the wing got when air was flowing over it at a certain rate. And they changed the angle of attack, and they changed the curvature, called the camber of the wings. They changed the air speed. All three of these things, angle of attack, airspeed, and camber, affect the lift. And they started to find out what the best combinations were. So when they went out there next time, they weren't just dicking around. They had the answers. They knew what they were doing. They looked at it like scientists. And unlike pure scientists, they were also mechanics. They were not engineers. They were mechanics. They built bicycles. So if you need a wind tunnel, you don't get to go to eBay or Amazon and order a wind tunnel. No one knows what a wind tunnel is. You have to build one. You have to construct one. You have to not only the mechanicals of building a wind tunnel are not terribly hard, but you have to understand what you're trying to do. No one had ever thought of these things before. It's amazing. Absolutely amazing. And I'm ashamed I don't know his name. I bet you somebody in the comment section does before I finish telling this story. The great unsung hero of flight is not just the Wright brothers who built the flyer and used a form of control called wing warping, which is not practical. It's not really practical for canvas and fabric wings. It's utterly impractical for hardwood or aluminum wings, or carbon fiber wings for that matter. But the Wright brothers built the controllable vehicle, and they did the wings, and they did all this other stuff. Charlie Taylor, that's the name. I couldn't remember it. Thank you, Amendment 10. The great unsung hero of flight is a guy you've never heard of. His name is Charlie Taylor. Charlie Taylor was just a mechanic and a tinkerer, and he built the engine on the Wright Flyer because the Wright brothers were looking for an engine, and they had a pretty good idea of how much horsepower they needed, but it also had an idea of how much weight it could be, because that's the whole battle, right? How much lift can we get? And if we can cut the weight, every pound of weight that we don't have to carry is a pound of lift that we don't need to get. So They could not find an engine that was powerful enough and light enough to do the job. And along comes Charlie Taylor, who, to my understanding, I'm ready to stand corrected here for people who know more about this than I do, is basically just a mechanic. And he built this 4-cylinder engine out of aluminum. And thanks, Amendment 10, for pointing that out. And it generated about 13 horsepower. And that was just enough, because if you notice the first flight pictures, that thing didn't go climbing out at a 70-degree deck angle and accelerate on the way up. They just barely had enough to get the thing off the ground. And as ATS 608 points out, they weren't government subsidized. And you may say, oh, that's trivial. Now you're just sniping. No, not sniping. Because there was somebody who was, in fact, subsidized, and that was Langley. Langley was the big brain, right? Langley was a professor of aeronautics, I think he was, and he was backed by the Smithsonian Institution. He was given a large budget to build a practical flying machine, and he launched him into the Potomac or the Hudson, I can't remember which, launched him into a river, because he knew they weren't going to do, he's backing himself up, right? They were called aerodromes, I think, and they looked nothing like a modern airplane. They looked like, they looked almost a little bit like a really ugly sort of dragonfly. 2 wings in the front, 2 wings in the back, about the same size, and hideously heavy. And I think they might have tried to pilot in it once, and it was literally like one of those comedy routines. They launched him off a rail over the river, and he just was like a Red Bull event, you know, where you're trying to fly the Statue of Liberty, just splash. Not just a failure, not even close. Not even close. Didn't look anything like an airplane. If you look at the Wright brothers airplane, you've got wings, you've got a tail. You had pusher props, and they switched to tractor props, but now we have pusher props in the form of turbofan engines, which is essentially a multi-bladed propeller that's driven by a jet engine. You have a gas turbine engine and a turboprop. Every commercial jet you've ever flown has basically, the fan is a propeller, and it's a pusher propeller. Anyway, here's old Charlie Taylor just tinkering around, just good old American mechanic, and he just built this thing for them. And as Amendment 10 says, bless his heart, I don't know what we'd do. The first flight was 120 feet. The first flight was well inside the wingspan of a 747, well inside. The second flight was a little bit longer. The third flight was a little bit longer, but the fourth flight was significantly longer, much, much longer, 5 or 6 times the distance of the first 3. And then it was time to fly again, but they didn't secure the airplane, and they were celebrating their win. You know, hey, we just got a decent one off, and the wind came up and smashed it. Parts of it made it to the Smithsonian in the form of the Wright Flyer, but the airplane that flew, the structure that flew the first 4 flights was destroyed after the 4th flight because they just weren't paying attention. It's got to be a heartbreaker, right? You spent all this years and years and years. And if you ever see the Wright brothers' shack at Kitty Hawk, you realize these guys were living in sand fleas and just cans of beans, just ladders and cots and bunks. These 2 brothers out there in the middle of the night, in the middle of nowhere, by themselves. That's dedication, man. You go out there they went 3, 4, 5 years before they got the flight. So finally they get the problem solved. They get their engine working, and they get their pressure tables working, and they've survived their glider test. They're still alive after that. And you finally built the world's first flying machine. First attempt, but you flew. Second attempt, a little better. Third attempt, a little better. Fourth attempt is like, hey, man, we got the hang of this. We got that. And then, woo, let's go celebrate. And the wind comes and smashes it. It's hard to take, but kind of cool in the same way, you know. But I have so much admiration for the Wright brothers. I have so much admiration for them because of their methodical. That's what it was. The methodical quality of it. They did not just go out there and dick around. They had to go out there, learn. They had to go out there to learn what they didn't know. And then when they had a fair idea of what it was that they didn't know, they invented ways to find out what it was that they didn't know. And then they took what they learned and built that into things, and then those things went out to find out what else they didn't know. And if you've ever flown the Wright Flyer in a flight sim, it's unflyable. The Wright brothers did something else that was really odd. If you look at every airplane in the sky today, with the exception of fighter aircraft, but every commercial airplane, every private airplane, and in fact, virtually every airplane, commercial jetliners, obviously. If you look at them from the front, the wings, as the wings move out, they go up. That's called dihedral. And dihedral is a stabilizing tendency. If you think about dihedral, the best way to think about dihedral is if you imagine a wooden salad bowl and a tennis ball. If you have the salad ball pointed down so that the dome is on top, and you put a tennis ball on the top, the slightest little movement of the tennis ball will accelerate as it rolls off of the side of the tennis ball. It gets faster and faster and faster as it rolls down the side. That's a dynamically unstable position. If, on the other hand, the bowl is inverted and it goes up to the sides, then the ball will just come right back to the center. And that's exactly why airplane wings are tilted up. It levels the airplane in roll. It's a natural leveling device. It's called dihedral. But the Wright brothers were worried about that because they thought if the wind got underneath a raised wingtip, it might flip the plane over. So what they actually did was they built anhedral. They built the wings to slowly slope down, which prevented this problem that probably wasn't much of a problem, but made the plane unbearably complicated and tough to control. It's a miracle they could fly that thing at all. But that's it. And if you ever get a chance to see an antique air show and see one of there's Wright Flyer replicas out there, but the airplane that they actually really flew was it the Model B? The 1905 aircraft, I think it was. They took a year off after they flew to start getting their legal stuff in order. But, you know, I told this story before, but I told it last time on the Stratosphere Lounge. Last thing I'll say about it, we'll call it a night. So the Wright brothers invent flight, and they have a picture taken, and the world has announced that the Americans have done it, and the French deny it, and Germans deny it, and a lot of people deny it and say, I don't know, it's another gliding attempt, and it was launched by a catapult which gave it energy, and all that other stuff. So there's a lot of questions and concerns about it. So the Wright brothers, as soon as they do it, again, this methodical Yankee kind of mind, they stop flying for a year or two, or maybe even longer. Maybe it was even 3. And what happens is the Wright brothers give up flying. They just don't fly anymore because they start to pursue patent. They start to pursue the wing warping, and they start to pursue the engine. They try to patent the entire idea, and they're trying to legally protect themselves so they can make money off of this thing. So for 2 or 3 years after the first flight of the first airplane, the Wright brothers just not there. It may have been longer, may have been 4 or 5 years. I don't remember the exact date. But what I do remember very well without the date is within 4 or 5 years of the first flight, there was the French were having an aerodrome kind of a celebration of flight kind of thing, and the French had made some real progress. A bunch of people were actually flying heavier than air machines. And so the Wright brothers finally, after many, many years of being out of the scene, go to this event, and they bring their Model B or whatever it was, their second design, which is kind of a sit upright instead of lie on it kind of design. And the French are mocking and scoffing at them and, saying you didn't really do anything and look at us now, and, they're up there. Now the French and the other Europeans, in order to turn the airplane, they'd seen the airplane. This is really a key thing. The French and the Europeans had seen the airplane as a boat that goes through the air. And so in order to turn the boat, you would use the rudder, which basically yaws the plane side to side. And so the French were trying to turn the plane using the rudder. And it is possible to turn a plane using a rudder, but it takes you forever. The plane just wants to fly straight, so you constantly have to slowly put this thing in there, and there's adverse yaw and all kinds of other things. But the point is, the Europeans were trying to turn like a boat. The Wright brothers didn't see the airplane as a boat. They thought of it as a bicycle. And so the way you turn a bicycle is you lean. You lean into the turn, and then you let the natural lift inclination, the lift vector, you let that turn the airplane. So the Wright brothers got to this event in France and faced a lot of scorn. And the second that they took off and started their first turn, the French, everybody, all of the Europeans, literally just dropped their sandwiches and their ice cream cones. It's just like, okay, we surrender. They're the geniuses, because the Wright Flyer was making turns in an eighth of what the competing Europeans were doing, because they were trying to steer the thing with a rudder, trying to yaw it around. The Wright brothers rolled into a turn, used the lift vector, and just poof, and off they went, because they were bicycle mechanics. They were bicyclists and bicycle mechanics. It's the greatest story ever. It's the most American story ever. And when Barack Obama, several State of the Unions ago, 3 or 4 years ago, talked about the Wright brothers in the context of the government, and in terms of like, if it weren't for the government, we wouldn't have had the first flight. Like everything else this guy says, it's like gaslighting. It's like, he couldn't have said that. I mean, that's an inversion of the truth, right? I mean, nobody else heard that? No, what are you talking about? The Wright brothers were the inversion of the government. The government had a program with Langley, and his aerodromes, or whatever they were called, or velociraptors, or whatever the damn things were named, just kept going kersplash. And he had a budget. He had hundreds of thousands of dollars. And he was the big brain, and he was the celebrated director of the Smithsonian Institute, or whatever the hell else he was. And he was the great man, and he was the famous one, and all the newspapers asked him, how's it going, Dr. Langley? Well, my velocipede, or my aerodrome, or whatever, and blah, 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 blah. And he creates this thing that doesn't even look like an airplane, and kersplash, kerplash, kerplash, kerplash. Meanwhile, a couple of guys who live in Ohio, whose father is a reverend, a couple of weirdo bachelors, whose only female contact was their sister, get in a bloody train and covered with canvas and birch. They go to flea-infested, North Carolina beaches and live on the beaches in these primitive conditions, eating cans of beans at night, sitting up talking, arguing with each other. It's said about the Wright brothers that they had a kind of relationship where Orville would take a position, Wilbur would take a position, they'd start screaming and yelling at each other, and 4 hours later, Orville would have Wilbur's position and Wilbur would have Orville's position. And they were just together, just knocking it out, figuring out how to do it. And they didn't have any money except their own money, and they didn't have any support except their own support. They didn't have anything except for their own belief in themselves and their independence. And what they needed, they built. And what broke, they had to fix. They're bloody marvels, those two guys. Absolute marvels. And, we couldn't do it today in a million years. Because of the government. How many people, how many Wright brothers out there right now, I wonder? How many geniuses, how many people with this idea that they got a new way of doing things and simply won't ever have a chance? How many Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniaks are there out there who had an idea that could have changed the world the way that an iPhone changed? How many people are there that are just not going to get a chance because of this stuff? A lot of people. You just leave them alone. Just leave them alone and watch what happens. But no, can't do that. I actually did some shooting, shot some video with the GoPros, and they talk to your iPad or your iPhone with a Wi-Fi signal, so you can see what the camera's seeing. And I had intermittent results with it. The video was good; it kept dropping the signal. But I'm going to do a little flying video from inside the C.S.R, and we'll get up there and I'll show you what it's all about for the low and slow of us. I have so many jokes about my airplane, and I have the slowest airplane in the sky, and it's a line of like 9 jokes slower than Christmas. It's the only airplane that's been certified to survive a bird strike from the rear. It doesn't have an airspeed indicator. It has a calendar. It's passed by hot air balloons routinely. It's just a really slow airplane. And when I say slow, it's an 80-knot airplane, 85, 90 knots. It's 100 miles an hour. It's blown backwards in some cases. But I do love it so much, and it's so friendly, and it feels like a fighter airplane. It's got a canopy, and it's got a stick on the right and a throttle on the left the way God intended. And, there you go. So anyway, we'll do a flying thing. Let's see if we can talk about, maybe we'll do a flying episode next time, or a movie episode. I'm in the mood for a theme episode, although this was a one-word episode, and that was fun too. And we are now at 2 hours and 30 minutes, 2:27. For the love of God, people, what are you doing awake listening to this silliness? Anyway, I think we're gonna have real good news real soon, and some other things in motion as well. And all these things will be fun and good. And I love talking to you guys about it, and I especially love being able to bounce things off of you early. Talking to some people today about some of these projects, and talk about the Common Sense Resistance or Free Frontier, all that other stuff. And I say, the fan base. The people just love it, and it's great. It's great to have the enthusiasm come back. It just keeps me going. If I didn't have the enthusiasm from guys like you, men and women like you, and all the comments on Facebook, I just couldn't stay in the game. You can't maintain this level of enthusiasm for decades without feedback. So when I talk to people about the Common Sense Resistance, or if I talk to them about Free Frontier or Aurora or whatever the case may be, I'm just constantly motivated by the fact that the few people that know about it, now to be you, really seem to like it. And so for those of you that put in these really positive, supportive comments in the comments section while we shoot the show, and those of you who leave great comments at the website, BillWhittle.com, or on YouTube, or especially on Facebook, The Facebook messages that I get from people, I don't get to answer many of them, but I read them all, and they mean the world to me, honestly. They really do. I was at 2 speaking events the last couple of weeks, and I had numbers of people come up to me and say, would you mind if we take a picture? And I was like, mind if we take a picture? You know, I'm going to be the last person out of this room, ma'am. I'm going to be the last person to leave this room. You come all the way down here to see me, and I'll be the last person out of here. I met a Stratolonger in St. Louis. I wonder if he's watching now. I don't want to out the guy. A charming man. Everybody I meet is just terrific. They're just terrific, really, really terrific. And Zachariah Tiemans, one of the Tiemans brothers, said so much for 90 minutes. Yeah, it's an hour and then 90 minutes. It's anyway, whatever. It's fun. I always think, how am I going to get through this? I may do a 40-minute episode or 30 and stuff. Next thing you know, it's late. All right, well, it's 8:30 here on the Pacific Coast. It's later than that out in America. Thank you for the kind words about the haircut, Louisa. I like it too. It's a little snappier. Got to kind of, it's like a falcon pulling its wings in for a dive. You know, it's like we got to get some traction and some motion, get some money from people, get some things going. So I got to kind of tighten up the look, and down we go. But I've got. I want to thank my operations manager Desiree, who's been really doing just a bang up super job of running in front of us and keeping things rolling. And the DVDs for the Your Government thing are not ready yet. We're still just doing the last of the assembly, sending it off to the mastering thing. They'll be ready about the same time as the Arroyo, but you'll get them, and I'm sorry about the delay. Other than that, I'm having a blast. And somebody here says, Final Penance says it was a wonderful first live experience. And yeah, if you've watched the show on YouTube and nothing but YouTube, come on into the live show. You have to put up with the buffering and some commercials, and it's kind of a drag. But you know, the main thing is the people that watched on YouTube are multiplied as 2 orders of magnitude, or 20 times, at least 20 times the number of people watch it live. So if you've watched it on YouTube and you want to watch it live, it's really fun. If you do, for God's sakes, log in and make a comment in the comment stream, because I'm always glancing over there. It's fantastic. It's like my personal Siri, right? It's like this crowd and education level of the people that watch the show is the most flattering thing to me of all. And it's not just about the stuff I'm interested in. I mean, really, seriously, I could say, what's the name of that ziggurat that Hammurabi built on the banks of the river Tigris? It escapes me at the moment. And 20 seconds go by, 30 seconds go by in terms of lag to get it to the server, and then back out and down to you, and then back to me. And next thing I know, it's like, doing, 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 doing. It's fantastic. It's really, really fun. Okay, so that's the end of another episode 57 of the Stratosphere Lounge. It's hard to believe. 58. Yeah, somebody said a gun episode. Let's do a gun episode. In fact, maybe what we should do is do name the episode. That'd be kind of fun. Instead of questions, we'll take that's what we'll do if I can remember it. Next time we'll do instead of naming the questions, we'll name the episode. And that'll be cool. Maybe I'll do it on Monday, and then we'll do the show in the middle of the week and take your top episode choices. That's a fun idea. It's a grand idea. Okay. I always hate to say goodbye, but it's time to say goodbye. You don't have to go home, but you can't stay here. Thanks, guys. It was a great pleasure seeing with you as always. Thanks again, as always, for your membership and your emotional support on everything else. And, yeah, get ad block, says Zachariah Tiemans, one of the androids that lurk in the ether. Have a great evening, everybody. Take care of yourselves. We'll see you out there, and talk to you soon. Bye-bye.